Glad to be able to engage with all of you. It's Wednesday evening. I've got a few things to talk to you about, and I'm really glad you all are here. So be sure to hit the like button, be sure to hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit the notifications bell so you get updated every time we have one of these. I know a lot of you are here because of the notifications, so be sure to hit that notifications bell. The way this works is that as I'm speaking, just keep your super chats flowing in. I will take my trusty pencil and paper and I will write down my pen and paper. I will write down your super chat questions as they come in. Then, as I will open with my opening remarks, then from there I do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations, and then I spend the rest of the show answering your super chat questions. That's how we do it, right? So you guys really have the ability to make this show really something special based on your questions. So that's kind of how it works. Your super chat questions make the show happen. I have my opening remarks. As the super chats are coming, I write them down, and then I just answer them in the order that they came. That's how we do the show here. So if you have a question, why don't you just super chat that question to me? I've got plenty of unnamed orange beverage. Orange glad. I've got orange beverage. I'm really glad that all of you are here. And I'm sitting here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. It's pouring rain outside. It was a rainy day today in New York City. Haven't been outside very much. As I told you all, I'm getting over some illness. All right, Kautsky. All right, very good. And told you all I was getting over some illness, but in addition to that, I should be back to normal pretty soon. I'm getting a little stir crazy sitting here in the house. I have a small one-bedroom apartment that I share with my lovely wife, and it's getting a little stir crazy. So it'll be nice when I'm going back to work, hopefully next week, and I'm just enjoying our lovely spring weather. But until then, I will continue to give you live updates on world events. So I want to just go over a couple world events that are worth talking about. First of all, I don't know if folks saw, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia made a big show of offering a peace plan in Yemen. They said, "Oh, we're offering a peace plan, a peace plan." Third world is revolution is of course undesirable because a settler revolution. Okay, all right. Yeah, an imperial core. So, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Oh boy. Speaking, if Mark's understanding. Okay. So, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia made a big show of presenting a peace plan for the country of Yemen and saying that they are offering this peace deal to the people of Yemen. The people of Yemen are in revolt against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Revolutionary Committee, headed by Ansar Allah, aka the Houthis, has seized control of much of the country. The Saudis are bombing and killing people in Yemen. They've killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people already. And so now the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia did a publicity stunt, announced they were offering a peace plan. Now, U.S. media is saying, "Oh, the Houthis rejected the peace plan. How awful." But you have to actually look at the details of the peace plan, which no one is doing. I went on, you can actually go to some alternative media and read the details of the peace plan that the Saudis offered. It's not a real peace plan. The Saudi peace plan would not allow the people of Yemen to open the Sana'a airport. They would not be able to have an airport in their capital under this peace plan. Furthermore, the Hodeida port, for the ocean, that's blockaded by Saudi Arabia, would not be unblockaded. So they wouldn't be able to fly in food and medical supplies under this peace plan. They would not be able to open up and get ships to come to the port of Hodeida under this peace plan. Furthermore, the Saudis have seized 14 ships. 14 ships that were trying to bring fuel, like gasoline, like natural gas, petroleum, the things that people use to like heat, make their cars run and heat their homes in the winter, etc. 14 ships that were destined for Yemen to bring fuel have been seized by the Saudis. Under this peace plan, the Saudis wouldn't even give those vessels back. They weren't bringing any weapons. They weren't bringing anything but fuel. And the Saudis won't even release those ships to bring fuel to Yemen. How is that a peace plan if you're not allowing them to have their own airport, right? I mean, I'm sorry, if we were at war with a country, if you were having a war, and someone said, "Oh, we're going to settle the war. We'll have a ceasefire." You're just not allowed to have any airports. You're not allowed to have any sea travel. And all the 14 ships that were trying to bring you stuff that we seized, we're going to hold on to them. Now, even the UN Secretary General Gutierrez, he has called for Saudi Arabia to release those fuel ships. He says, look, they have the right to fuel, right? You don't have the right to send bombs or weapons to Yemen for the fighting. You do have the right. You do have the right to get gasoline. And the people, there's a humanitarian crisis in the country. People are starving. People are desperate. They have the right to have fuel come into the country. And yet, under the Saudi peace plan, they won't even follow the UN. Won't even follow the UN. Writing it down. Won't even follow the UN and allow that. This is not a real peace plan, but it's a way for the Saudis to say, look, we offered peace, but these crazy terrorist rebels, they didn't want peace. This is a classic stunt. You offer a deal. The Saudis know there is no way in the world that the people of Yemen that are fighting for their national liberation, that they would agree to a peace plan that doesn't let them fly airplanes or have ships come in. It wouldn't even give them the ships that the Saudis have already seized. So it's not a real peace plan. This is just a classic stunt, right? And the media, of course, the Wall Street Journal, partially owned by Saudi Arabia, U.S. media in bed with the Pentagon, which is supplying all the weapons to the Saudis as they bomb and destroy Yemen. They're making it sound like, oh, Saudi Arabia offered this great peace plan, and the Houthis just turned it down. Oh, I guess we know who the aggressors are. Those Yemenis are aggressors in their own country, and it's the Saudis that offered a nice peace plan. It's a propaganda tactic, and it's frustrating to see the American media coverage of it. They never say what was in the plan and why the Houthis rejected the plan. If you look at the details, it's pretty obvious how ridiculous of a plan it really is. Furthermore, North Korea, again, very similar, right? Other side of the world, different ideology. Houthis are Shia Muslims, Houthis are Shia Muslims. The North Koreans are Juche and Marxists, and writing it down. Narco-syndicalism. Okay. Narco-syndicalism. Eastern Bloc government. Eastern Bloc. Aim, reasons. So North Korea has, according to reports, not confirmed yet, apparently there were 2 missiles that were launched into the ocean. And of course, U.S. media is saying, oh, North Korea is so aggressive. How dare they launch these missiles? This is awful. They launched 2 missiles into the middle of the ocean. How dare they do that? That's just unacceptable. Let's look at the situation with North Korea. Let's look at the situation in North Korea. Right? I mean, what's going on in North Korea? Let's see if I turn this light out. Maybe my face will be lighter. See that? Now you can see my face much better. So North Korea is blockaded under crippling economic sanctions that make it difficult for them to import all kinds of basic necessities like petroleum, they're under crippling economic sanctions. And they are willing to negotiate with the United States. They met with Donald Trump, first in Singapore. They met with Donald Trump in Hanoi. They met with Donald Trump. Donald Trump became the first U.S. president to enter North Korea. North Korea is willing to negotiate. and they're willing to negotiate, giving up their nuclear weapons. They're ready to negotiate. And the United States, after having these historic meetings that are like huge, the United States says to them, unless you totally and permanently, disarm your nuclear weapons, unless you do that, no more negotiations. It just cuts them off, right? And the sanctions are continuing. It's difficult for North Korea to get, basic supplies into the country. They're facing a blockade. There's thousands of U.S. troops in South Korea that every year they have the war games where they rehearse all-out war against North Korea. And so North Korea, they shoot off some missiles, and it shows that they have the ability to retaliate. That if they were attacked, they would have the ability to retaliate. Right? They send a missile, they shoot a missile into the ocean near Japan to make a point. Look, we can retaliate if you attack us, but they're the aggressors, right? This is a country that after the Soviet Union fell, North Korea had a humanitarian crisis. The USA, with the petrodollar, prevented North Korea from importing any petroleum. And their food system, their agricultural system, they need gasoline for those tractors, came to a grinding halt. And millions of people starved to death in the 1990s. They called it the arduous March period. Millions of North Koreans were starving to death because the United States government had subjected them to economic warfare. It was absolutely horrendous. I mean, people died in mass. Can you imagine? People a crisis of malnutrition squeezed in by the United States. The United States killed millions of North Koreans. It killed millions of them in the 1950s during the Korean War. It was about 4 million killed. And then during the early 90s, I don't know there's estimates about how many, but in the early 90s then, when they wouldn't allow any petroleum with the petrodollar and the sanctions to enter North Korea, they then caused a crisis of malnutrition and killed millions of North Koreans in the 90s. So they've been subject to this extreme attack, and in the context of that humanitarian food crisis in the 1990s, when people were starving to death, North Korea realized the United States would probably try to use that moment to have a coup or overthrow the government. So North Korea announced that they were going to possibly get nuclear weapons in case the United States were to invade them. And so Bill Clinton swung into action. Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton swung into action, and they said to North Korea, okay, if you don't get nukes, we're going to give you food, we're going to give you millions of dollars worth of food, we're going to build nuclear power plants for you so you can have peaceful nuclear energy, we're going to give you all kinds of heating gas, it's really cold winters they've got there in North Korea, if you don't get nukes. And North Korea said, okay, you give us the food, you give us the nuclear power plants, you give us the heating oil and all that, we don't get nukes. Good deal. Great deal. And so then, after some of the food was delivered, the Republicans in Congress passed a law banning, and not funding the deal. So North Korea, in exchange for not getting nukes, right, was promised all of this stuff, and then they didn't get what they were promised, and they held on, and they still didn't get nukes in the late 90s when Congress, the Republicans, prevented them from getting their heating gas and all that. They still held out, and then Bush gave the axis of evil speech after 9/11 and said there was an axis of evil: Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. And after that, North Korea tested nuclear weapons because they said, look, you just named this as the axis of evil. You haven't given us the food you promised to give us. And so they got nuclear weapons. That's why North Korea has nuclear weapons. And North Korea would like to give up its nuclear weapons. Russia and China would like for North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. Okay? Would anyone annoying Hollywood gossip socialist America. Alrighty. And so under these circumstances, North Korea has their nukes, and they're like, hey, United States, we'd like to give up our nukes. Let's negotiate this. And Trump, for whatever reason, probably because it's known that they are going to give them up, and Russia and China want, at some point North Korea is going to give up their nukes, right? Banning capitalist speech. All right. Thank you. Mass shootings as a symptom of capitalist decay. Mass shootings. Very good question. Decay. All righty. And thank you, Mateo, for the super chat. Power to the people. Much appreciated. So we got a situation where North Korea, they basically are in a situation where they want to give up their nukes. They're ready to negotiate. The United States kind of led them on, like they were going to negotiate giving up their nukes and ending the sanctions and having an economic boom. And Donald Trump gave them this flash drive, promising like an economic explosion. All right, Saddam Hussein. Socialist. All right. And then, then the United States just, backed off. In Vietnam, the talks started, and the United States that said that it would only negotiate with North Korea under the circumstances that North Korea completely and permanently disarmed. And North Korea said, no, like, we're going to negotiate this out. Like, let's have some baby steps first. Like, we're not just going to immediately give up the big deal. You want us to disarm. We'd like to disarm, so let's work this out. And the United States said, disarm now or no further negotiations. North Korea said, well, we ain't going to disarm. And that was it. And then that was the end. And so, yeah, North Korea, just to demonstrate to South Korea and the United States that has an increasing military presence in the region, they made clear that their missile system works. And we're supposed to be angry about this. We're supposed to think North Korea is somehow the aggressor here. I mean, it's very similar to the situation in Yemen. I mean, Yemen's being bombed and attacked by Saudi Arabia, but we're supposed to blame the Yemenis for it. I mean, this is, yeah, there you go. Writing it down. All right. Do you think the latest sanctions against China is an attempt to initiated by the U.S. to punish China for the disastrous meeting in Alaska? New sanctions on China. All righty. So there you go. Now, that's about North Korea. We talked about North Korea. We talked about Yemen. So now, also, we have Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, recently threatened German construction contracting companies. I don't know if you heard about this, but there's a very important pipeline that's being constructed. There's only a few miles left. It's almost done. It's called the Nord Stream 2, and it's a pipeline from Russia to Germany. The Russians are going to start selling natural gas to Germany, right? Germany is a sovereign state. Russia is a sovereign state. Russia has the right to sell natural gas to Germany. Germany has the right to buy natural gas from Russia. This is two sovereign states doing business with each other. Germans need natural gas. Russia needs to sell natural gas because its economy is centered around Gazprom, which is a state-controlled natural gas company. Everything seems pretty decent here, but the United States has never approved of this pipeline. They somehow are convinced that the Germans must import natural gas from the other side of the world. That instead of buying natural gas from Russia, which is right there, that instead the Germans must import natural gas all the way from the United States. They want them to buy it from fracking companies and from BP and Chevron. That's not going to happen, right? I mean, I'm sorry, it's just basic math. Like, that would be like, I live in a neighborhood. Maybe I run out of unnamed diet beverage, right? And there's a store like a block away from my house, and I say, you know what? There's a store a block away from my house. I'm going to buy Diet Coke. And Antony Blinken calls me up, and the U.S. Secretary of State, oh no, you have to go all the way to San Francisco to buy your natural gas. You have to go all the way to San Francisco to buy your Diet Coke. That's ridiculous, right? Russia's right there. The United States is on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, so the Germans want to buy their natural gas from Russia because it's way cheaper. It's pretty basic stuff. But the USA is just furious that they would dare buy natural gas from Russia. So now there's only a few miles of the pipeline left. Antony Blinken has threatened the companies. That are involved in building the pipeline. He's threatened them. He said that these companies these contracted companies that are involved in building this pipeline, this natural gas pipeline, might get hit with sanctions by the United States. The U.S. government might be taking action against construction companies, right? These are people that just want a job, right? With the economy the way it is, all of this, the economy's in a wreck. Imagine you're a German construction worker, you're a German construction firm, and you need some work. The economy has slowed down. All kinds of people are unemployed. They were about to have an Easter lockdown in Germany, and they just called it, their job. They're just doing their, there's a pipeline, a natural gas pipeline. They're going to start building it. What's the big deal? Well, apparently, if you do that, if your company is involved in that, the United States is now threatening you with sanctions. The United States is threatening sanctions on the construction firms that would help finish the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This is absolutely, absolutely ridiculous. And on top of that, it's not going to work, right? There are plenty of Russian construction workers. Okay? So if the United States is successful at intimidating the German construction firms that are finishing the pipeline, the Russian construction firms will finish it up. So it's a stupid move. It was a really, really stupid move. I doubt these German construction firms are going to be intimidated, but even if they are, then there'll be Russians. There are plenty of Russians who would be happy to finish building the pipelines. This is really, really dumb. All right, writing it down. Writing down the super chats as they come in. All right. Michael Hudson. Escobar. So, yeah, I mean, it's disappointing to see our leaders taking these kinds of moves, and I thought I'd mention that. Now, I wanted to get to, there's a number of stories in the news that are all kind of related, and they all kind of get back to the same point. That issue is migration. So, two things. First things first, crisis at the border, 30% increase in people crossing the border, unaccompanied minors showing up at the U.S. border. We were told that Donald Trump was an evil fascist because of the kids in cages, a policy that started under Obama, was continued by Trump, and now we know that the kids in cages policy is continuing under Biden. We've seen what the cages look like. They're kind of like the bubble, they've got the plastic walls, and the kids have like blankets that are like shiny aluminum blankets, and they're just kind of alone there in these plastic cells, and these are unaccompanied minors at the border. Kids are still in cages. However, the Biden administration insists kids are not in cages. Under Trump, kids were in cages. Now, children are in facilities, right? So it's not kids in cages. Let's remember that. Jen Psaki, the White House spokesperson, was adamantly clear. Trump did kids in cages. Biden does children in facilities. Got to be very clear. Got to be very, very clear about these things, right? But you look at the pictures that have come out. That looks a lot like kids in cages to me. They're plastic cages, right? Maybe that's related to the pandemic and, fears of COVID or something. But plastic cage, metal cage, it still looks like kids in cages to me. But, have no fear. Have no fear. We just found out they've appointed the great Kamala Harris to fix the situation. Because if there's anybody who knows about putting kids in cages, it's Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is an expert at this. She locked up parents whose kids were truant from school. So she knows all about putting kids in cages, parents in cages, fathers in cages, brothers in cages. She presided over mass incarceration in California. Her career took off in the 90s when the California prison population was exploding. If there's anybody who is really good at putting kids in cages, it's Kamala Harris. So we should all be so relieved that Biden has appointed Kamala Harris, an expert on incarceration, locking people up, tearing apart families, destroying people's lives, giggling about it, bragging about it, having no remorse about it. They put Kamala Harris in charge of the crisis at the border. I mean, I cannot think of a better expert. We should all just be so relieved. She is, as Kashik Ghosh is saying, she's the cage master. Absolutely. Kamala Harris will handle the kids in cages. She's going to deal with it. My God, I mean, if there's anyone who can deal with kids in cages, it's Kamala Harris. So we have nothing to worry about at the border. Kamala's got it handled. Kamala has it under control. So fear not, fear not. But now that we have this situation at the border, look, let's talk about who these children are. All right, so these are children, and they're from Guatemala, they're from Honduras, they're from Mexico, and a lot of them do not speak Spanish. Let me repeat that. They are from Guatemala, they are from Honduras, they are from Mexico, but they don't speak Spanish. They speak indigenous languages. I bet you didn't know this. A lot of people don't know this, but there are whole sections of Mexico, whole sections of Honduras, whole sections of Guatemala that don't have electricity and don't have running water and don't have schools. That's right. The free market, NAFTA, free trade, it's made lots of money for American bankers and Wall Street corporations. It's made lots of money for globalist, multinational, international bankers. It's destroyed the jobs of auto workers in the United States. It's destroyed the jobs of American farmers. It's destroyed the jobs of Mexican farmers. But it has not. It has left whole sections of Mexico and Honduras and Guatemala that have no running water, no electricity. The people there don't even have schools that teach them the official language of the country. They're speaking indigenous languages, the languages that were spoken in this area before Christopher Columbus showed up. That's the language a lot of these kids speak. Right? Now, Guatemala, they elected in 1953 Jacobo Arbenz, a socialist, who was trying to fight for the people of Guatemala. And he had a whole program about, he was a socialist. He legalized the Communist Party. He was going to build schools and hospitals. CIA overthrew him. Guatemala, 1953, CIA overthrew the socialist leader. And ever since then, Guatemala has had a string of brutal military dictators. Rios Montt in the 1980s committed genocide against the indigenous people because he thought they might be sympathetic to the communist rebels. He would go to whole villages and just slaughter the indigenous population of Guatemala. He was actually found guilty of war crimes, but then got off on a technicality. Rios Montt, who's a good friend of Ronald Reagan in Guatemala, mass murder, people starving, people hungry, corruption. That's Guatemala. Honduras, 2009, much more recently. 2009, Honduras elected Manuel Zelaya, a socialist who was going to start building schools and hospitals and building infrastructure. What happened? Well, the CIA and Hillary Clinton went in there and overthrew the government of Honduras and toppled the Honduran government. And ever since then, there's been a huge wave of assassinations. It has the highest murder rate in the world in Honduras. Drug gangs are everywhere. LGBT people get murdered routinely. They're targets. They're one of the primary targets of the drug gangs and mass murderers in Honduras. The elections, many people feel, are rigged in Honduras. There's riots in the streets because many of the people in Honduras want a socialist government that could fix things, but somehow the election results make sure that doesn't happen. So Honduras and Guatemala have suffered under free trade. There's big sections of the country that don't have access to running water, don't have access to education. And now, since the pandemic, the economy has gotten even worse, and the conditions these people are in have gotten even worse. So they're fleeing, and they're out of desperation, often running from drug gangs and running from terrorist narco gangs armed with U.S. weapons. They're getting to the border and trying to get to the United States. That's what's going on. This is a crisis created by capitalism. This is a crisis created by American imperialism. And when the unaccompanied minors get to the U.S. border, since they're minors, we can't, just send them back or whatever. So they get detained in these overflow facilities. It's absolutely a horrendous situation. Now, the right-wingers here in the United States, the right-wingers, they would have you believe that these, 14-year-old kids or 10-year-old kids or 8-year-old kids who are coming here out of desperation, that they're all, rapists and murderers and drug dealers and they're MS-13 and they're terrorists and we should all be very afraid and we should build a big giant wall. This is ridiculous, okay? I mean, these are people that are desperate. Are there criminal elements, among them? Of course. And the more difficult you make mass migration, the more you crack down, the bigger the walls get, the more MS-13 and criminal gangs are going to get more popular. Why? Because it's going to be harder to get in. And that's what MS-13 and that's what criminal gangs do, is they smuggle people over the border illegally. So if you make it hard for people to get in legally, then what happens is the people who smuggle them in illegally get stronger. I missed a super chat. Let me write it down before we forget. I get fired up, folks. All right. Way back. What was this super chat that I missed? Okay. Could NATO and EU dissolve? All right. Okay, let me write that down. Okay. Keep teaching, please. Thank you. I will keep teaching. All right. NATO and EU dissolve. So, we're supposed to be terrified of these children, right? The right wing wants us to think these children are all like gang members and criminals. And a little known fact is, there's two problems with that argument from the right wing, that these are all dangerous menaces to society. The first problem is that, it's well known that undocumented immigrants in the United States commit crimes at a lower rate than citizens do. Why? Because they're afraid of getting deported. Did you know that? It's actually very well documented that undocumented immigrants, and immigrants in general in the United States, commit crimes at a way lower rate than citizens do. So, there's a little fact. Number two, the harsher you make the immigration policies, the stronger the criminal gangs get. When people in immigrant neighborhoods are afraid to call the police, MS-13 has got a great place to operate because everyone's afraid to call the police, right? If you make immigrant communities terrified, if you make it difficult for people to cross the border and they're forced to start working with those organizations to do it, those organizations flourish. MS-13 and ICE are best friends, right? The more intense ICE gets, the more needed, the more protected, the more safe MS-13 is. MS-13 and ICE are the match made in heaven. Make immigrant communities terrified. Make them afraid to call the police. Make immigrants more and more in the shadows. And what happens? MS-13 and the criminal groups, they get stronger. Make it harder to sneak across the U.S. border. Make people more and more desperate to make it happen. And what happens? MS-13 gets all the money from these people, smuggling them across the border and then treating them as slaves when they get here. And come on, right? That ICE and MS-13 are a match made in heaven. That's basically what they are. The more immigrant communities are terrified of ICE, the stronger MS-13 gets. The more ICE, terrorizes and gets stronger and makes life harder for immigrant communities and raids and kicking down doors, the stronger MS-13 gets, okay? So, the two groups, they play off each other, okay? And that's what people don't get. And the right wing doesn't get that, right? The right wing doesn't get that. They have it in their minds that, they don't understand that they think people are coming here because America is just amazing and number one. They don't understand that it's capitalism that is doing this. It's capitalism that has created this crisis, and that, anti-communist U.S. foreign policy and CIA meddling and arms exports have created this humanitarian crisis. It's driving people here. And they also don't understand that the more ICE intensifies, the bigger the problem is going to be. So the right wing doesn't get it. But the left wing doesn't get it either. And that brings me to another news story. Another news story that is very closely related to this. The shooting that just happened in Colorado. Right? 10 people were shot in Boulder, Colorado at a supermarket. A 21-year-old man showed up with a gun and killed 10 people at a supermarket. Now, who was the 21-year-old? Who was he? His name was Ahmed Alawi Alissa. Ahmed Alawi Alissa. 21 years old. He was born in Raqqa, Syria. Okay? Born in Raqqa, Syria. 21 years old. Now, he's an immigrant. Okay? But he became a U.S. citizen. He's a naturalized. He became a U.S. citizen. Now, they say he had no ties to any extremist group. No ties to any extremist group, according to the FBI. But now it was leaked to the New York Times, quote, Ahmed Alawi Alissa was known to intelligence officials due to his links to another individual under investigation by the FBI. So no ties to extremist groups, but he was associated with somebody else who was under investigation by the FBI. Gets even more interesting. On Facebook, Ahmed Alawi Alissa He would post on Facebook. And what did he post about? He posted about martial arts. He was into karate. And he posted about Islam and why Islam was a great religion. And he posted about how much he was opposed to gay marriage. Very opposed to gay marriage. He posted that God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. It's interesting. Now, did you know that the country he was born in, Syria, is currently being bombed by the U.S. government? The U.S. government is funding all kinds of terrorists and extremists. But, Ahmed Alawi Alissa, he didn't ever post about that. That's interesting. But he did post that, you ought to check out Islam. He did post that, he doesn't like gay people. And he was apparently known to intelligence officials due to his links to another individual under investigation by the FBI. Okay, that's what the New York Times said. Gets even better. So, the New York Post interviewed his brother-in-law, asked his brother-in-law what he was like. And this is what the New York Post was told by his brother-in-law. He was not a proper Muslim. I don't know what kind of Muslim he was. He didn't go to mosque. Now, I know we're not supposed to talk about this, right? We're just supposed to say mental health, he had access to a gun, right? And we know, and the right wing, of course, are saying, oh, all Muslims are terrorists. No. All Muslims are not terrorists. That is not the case, right? And no, the issue here isn't, I think it's a little bit bigger than just that he had a gun and that he had access to a gun. Let me write down these super chats I missed here. All right. Persuade young leftists. Ortega. I don't know anything about that last one. So, here's the thing, folks. Now, right now, Syria is in the middle of a civil war. Syria has a secular government. It has a government run by the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party. The USA has been trying to overthrow the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party of Syria since the 1980s. Since the 1980s, the U.S. government has been arming and training religious fanatics to try and overthrow the Syrian government. There was a big uprising led by the Muslim Brotherhood, with the CIA backing them up in the 1980s. And it was very violent, and a lot of people died in Homs and Hama. And it was very horrendous, and the USA, if you can read, Stephen Gowans wrote a very good book about Syria. Very good book about Syria. And in that book, Stephen Gowans documents how for decades and decades, the USA has been trying to overthrow the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party of Syria. So, the allies of the United States have been, Wahhabis and fanatics and religious fanatics that think that it's not right to have a secular government, that want to, expel all the religious minorities from Syria, like Christians, like Alawites. And, I must say, this individual, this mass murderer, this mass shooter, Ahmed Alawi Alissa, who killed the people at the shopping center, at the supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. His family, they were called on the phone. Brother-in-law is called on the phone and asked, hey, what about your brother-in-law who just did this shooting? And he says, he was not a proper Muslim. I don't know what kind of Muslim he was. Is that what you would say? Like if one of your relatives, was arrested for having killed a bunch of people, would the first thing be out of your mouth, he wasn't a real Muslim, he wasn't a real Christian? What kind of family did Mr. Alissa grow up in, do you think? Do you think it was a Ba'athist Arab Socialist family? Do you think that's what it was? I kind of don't think that's the case. Don't think so. Don't think he was, a big supporter of the Syrian government. Yeah. He's from Raqqa, and he just happened to get a U.S. visa. You know how many people in the Middle East would love to get a visa to live in the United States? You know how many people in the Middle East would love to come here and live? But of all the people in Syria who could get a visa to live here, it just so happened that the family of Mr. Alyssa got a visa. Now, that makes me wonder. And the first thing out of the brother-in-law's mouth after he commits mass murder is he wasn't a real Muslim. Right? And, right now, the homeland of Mr. Alyssa, where he was born, right, is being bombed and destroyed by the United States. He doesn't post about that on his Facebook. What he does post on his Facebook is just how much he is opposed to gay marriage. Right? Interesting. Right. To kill a nation. Very good. Interesting. Folks, look, you want to talk about immigration. The issue at immigration, the issue that this country has with immigration is not 14-year-old kids from Guatemala who are starving and desperate trying to cross the border. That is not the problem we have with immigration in the United States. The issue we have with immigration is not Mexican families who lost their farms because of NAFTA trying to cross the border to get here. That is not the problem we have with immigration. I'll tell you what the problem we have with immigration is. The problem is whenever a country, anywhere in the world, has a socialist or an anti-imperialist revolution, all the people who are part of the old regime, all the right-wing fanatics, all the people that are extremists trying to overthrow that government, get visas to come to the United States. On January 6th, at the Capitol, the January 6th Capitol riot, at Donald Trump's big rally, everyone makes a big deal about the fact that there were Confederate flags at that rally. There were. A lot of people have pointed out there were a lot of Israeli flags at that rally because Netanyahu's supporters all turned out to support Trump. But what other people don't talk about is who else was at Donald Trump's big rally, right? Donald Trump is supposed to be an anti-immigrant bigot. But who was at Donald Trump's rally? The Falun Gong, Chinese anti-communists, members of a fanatical anti-communist cult that's trying to overthrow the Chinese government. The Epoch Times magical wheel in your stomach, fundamentalist Buddhist religious cult, Falun Gong, immigrants, came out to support Donald Trump. Who else were at the January 6th Capitol riot? Cubans, gusanos from Cuba, the fanatical, we hate Fidel Castro, the kind of people like Luis Posada Carriles who blew up airlines full of school children, mass murderers and terrorists trying to overthrow the Cuban government, trying to starve and kill their own people because they hate communism. They were there in big numbers. Immigrants, right? Cuban immigrants. Who else were there? Venezuelans, right? Venezuelans who burn food warehouses and hate their own people and want sanctions on Venezuela to kill their own people because they had a communist revolution. They were there to support Donald Trump. You know who else was there? Members of the Unification Church. The Moonies, the Korean fanatical cult of anti-communists, the fanatical that believe that Reverend Sun Myung Moon is the reincarnation of Jesus, members of Sean Moon's, it's called the Sanctuary Church, run by Reverend Moon's son, who have this special ceremony to bless their AR-15 rifles. The problem with immigration is not that the United States allows in hungry, desperate people from Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala. The problem we have with immigration here in the United States is we let into our country all the anti-communist, fanatical, religious nuts and extremists who are trying to turn back social progress around the world. The family of Mr. Alyssa, they were not Syrians who loved their country, who loved socialism and opposed imperialism and supported the Syrian government. Oh no, he came from a family of fundamentalists and extremists who were working with the United States to overthrow the Syrian government. I do not know that for a 100% fact, but how do you think he got a visa? And why do you think the first words out of Mr. Alyssa's relative's mouth is, he wasn't a proper Muslim? We know exactly the kind of people the United States brings in. It doesn't bring in good Syrians who love their country. It brings in the forces of reaction. Just like we bring in the Falun Gong, just like we bring in the Cuban gusanos, just like we bring in the Venezuelans. And these people, the right wing says nothing about it, right? These people don't jump over a wall or crawl under a fence to get into the United States. They are brought in by the CIA, They reward them with visas. Did you know that? In Syria, in Yemen, in countries like that, the United States is looking for allies, and they'll actually go to the family and they'll say, "Hey, do you want your kids to all get visas to live in America? Sure, okay, well, just join the terrorists, go bomb some hospitals, go blow up some schools, go take some hostages, and if you do enough of a good job doing that, we'll give you a visa and you can live in America and you can open a 7-Eleven and it'll be so great." This policy of allowing what Dust James in the comments just called the international forces of reaction into the country has continued to bounce back on us, right? Right. I mean, it's not just Mr. Alyssa, who comes from an anti-Syrian government, deeply religious, possibly Wahhabi family in Syria. That you can go closer to home here in New York City. There was a bombing in New York and New Jersey from I believe it was Ahmed Rahami. And who was Ahmed Rahami? He was the son. His parents were people who fought against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Remember that? When Osama bin Laden was being trained by the CIA to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan? Well, one of them, got a visa to come here, had kids, and his kid grew up to be the New Jersey bomber. The Tsarnaev brothers in Boston. Who were they? Well, they were Chechen Americans, and who were their parents? They were people who worked with Saudi Arabia and the CIA to fight against the Soviet Union in Chechnya and fight against Russia, right? And then they got a visa, and they came here, and their kids then went and blew up the Boston Marathon, right? I mean, this is example after example. Remember the Pulse nightclub shooting, 2016, the Pulse nightclub shooting, right? Omar Mateen, the nut who shot up the Pulse nightclub, who was his father? His father was an Afghan who was friends with members of Congress and had worked with the United States against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, along with Osama bin Laden. The problem with our immigration policy is not 14-year-old kids coming here because they follow the law at a much better, a much higher rate. They don't break the law. They're not the problem. The problem with immigration is that basically the United States has put up a neon sign and says, "Are you an anti-communist fanatic? Are you a terrorist trying to overthrow a socialist government? Do you believe in mystical, fanatical, fundamentalist religious beliefs that motivate you to kill communists and bomb hospitals and bomb schools? Are you one of those? You can come here to the United States. We want you." A Luis Posada Carriles, a Cuban who blew up an airline and killed a bunch of school children, a bunch of Cuban school children who were flying back to Cuba, blew up an airline. He lives comfortably in Miami. Right? The Falun Gong cult that kidnapped children in China, has been destabilizing China and spreads all kinds of right-wing lies with their Epoch Times. All these Chinese immigrants, who were trying to overthrow the Chinese government, here they are in the United States, right? Mr. Alyssa, his family, they don't support Bashar Assad and the Syrian government. They don't support him. They're fanatical religious people. Here they are. They're in Boulder, Colorado. That's the problem with immigration. I am sick and tired of the U.S. government filling our country up with terrorists and anti-communist fanatics. I am sick of it, and we have to deal with it, right? And it feeds the big problem we have here, right? Here in the United States, we're the only industrial country where people don't have health care. Right? We're the only industrial country in the world and the only Western industrial country where people don't have health care. And you know why it is? Because we have a whole bunch of idiots walking around going, "That's communism. I fled from a country where people get health care. That's called communism. Oh, I didn't come to..." And they reinforce it. Everyone in America thinks they know all about communism because they talk to one of these fucking idiots. I'm serious. They're walking around all the time. "Oh, I fled. I'm a gusano from Cuba. I know all about what communism is like." This is why, it hurts us. It hurts us, right? We have roads that are unpaved, right? Because the municipalities can't afford to pay it. Our water treatment systems are falling apart. We don't have health care. Our labor unions are weak, and we don't have protection on the job because, we've imported a bunch of fucking idiots into this country. A bunch of Falun Gong, Gusano, Wahhabi fanatics. Basically, if you're on the wrong side of history in any country in the world, whether it's Afghanistan, if you were on the wrong side in Afghanistan, if you were pouring acid on women's faces, forces to fight the Soviet Union. If you were in Cuba trying to blow up hospitals and schools when Fidel was coming to power, if you were in China, kidnapping children and trying to brainwash them against the Chinese Communist Party, you can come here. We love you. Come on here. And so what? Maybe your kids grow up to blow up the Boston bombing or something. Maybe they come in and shoot up a supermarket in Colorado. At least they're not communists, right? At least you're not a communist. I mean, this is ridiculous. And nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to talk about this. This is the immigration problem we have in the United States. This is our immigration problem. It's the come here as long as you're a right-wing fanatic problem that we have. That is the problem. How many families were destroyed by the Moonies, right? We brought this nut job, Reverend Sun Myung Moon, to the United States. Reverend Sun Myung Moon was a guy who claimed to be the second coming of Jesus and started this crazy fanatical cult here in the United States, destroyed families, brainwashed people. I mean, you can read about how predatory the group was. I interviewed a survivor of the group, named Faith Yen. She talked all about what the Moonies are really like internally, right? I mean, destroyed families, brainwashing, but Richard Nixon brought him to the United States, and he had him run an anti-communist recruiting campaign on college campuses. The Moonies run the Washington Times, the right-wing pro-Trump newspaper, right? This is our immigration problem. I'm probably sounding like a dead horse, but it needs to be said, right? You want to talk about an immigration problem, right? I say that we let all those, those kids at the border from Guatemala and Honduras who are hungry and they just want to feed their families. It'd be better if they could stay in their own country if there wasn't, an economic situation that drove them here. But they're not hurting me. They're not hurting me. I'm being hurt by the Washington Times. I'm being hurt by the Epoch Times. I'm being hurt by the stupid gusanos from Miami. I am being hurt by the Falun Gong. That's who's hurting me. That's who has been driving the welfare state to be eroded in this country, pushing all these right-wing policies, telling people all kinds of made-up stupid stories about communism's so evil, Fidel Castro ate little babies for dinner every day. I saw it. I was there. You can't argue with me. I saw it. I saw it. That's the problem we have in America. This is the problem we have in America. I say that we let all those hungry kids from Guatemala and Honduras into the country, and we deport all the Miami gusanos. We let them go back to Cuba to deal with Fidel Castro. We deport all the Falun Gong people. We send them back to China so the Chinese communists can deal with them. We deport all of the Afghan, terrorists who were trying to, were working with Osama bin Laden against the Soviet Union. We deport all the Chechen separatists. Why don't we deport all the right-wing scum that the CIA has imported into America? Why don't we deport them? Right? That's what I want to. That's what I want to do. If I was president, there would be a big immigration crackdown. It wouldn't be on the border. It would be in Miami. It would be in the right wing neighborhoods. It would be at the Epoch Times. It would be at the Washington Times. That's where the deportations would take place. There would be a mass crackdown on immigration if I was president, but it wouldn't be against hard-working people who just want to come here and have a job. It would be against right-wingers and fanatics who have been, destroying our country, pushing austerity economics, waging war against our labor unions, driving our wages down, pushing for deregulation, making a situation where our roads are crumbling, where our schools are falling apart, where we got prisons for profit. These people believe in free market insanity, right? And that's who I would deport. That's who I would take the visas away from. That's the problem. That's the problem. And I probably am going to get a huge amount of flack for saying this. You're a Nazbol, Caleb. You're playing up racism. No, I'm not. I'm not playing up racism. The majority of Latino immigrants to this country are great people. The majority of Chinese immigrants to this country are great people. The majority of Korean immigrants to this country, great people. But the folks that are aligned with the far right-wing groups that come here to lobby the U.S. government to push austerity economics and deregulation that are tied to fanatics and extremists, yeah, I've got a problem with them. I've got a problem with the family of Mr. Alyssa that were trying to overthrow the socialist government of Bashar Assad. I've got a problem with Ahmed Rahami's parents who were running around with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, pouring acid on women's faces if they weren't wearing a headscarf. I got a problem with the Chechen brothers' parents that were trying to set up a fanatical Wahhabi state in Chechnya, right, and break Chechnya away from the Soviet Union and murdered communists in Chechnya. I got a problem with them. I do have a problem with you. I don't have a problem with you if you're Chinese. I don't have a problem with you if you're Chechen, if you're Afghan, if you're Korean. Don't have a problem with any of these people on the basis of their race. I think we should allow immigrants from many different countries. I don't think we should allow right-wing fanatics and terrorists into the United States of America. And the fact that we've been doing that for decade after decade after decade, we've been doing this, since 1917. In 1917, Congress passed a law that if you are fleeing a communist dictatorship, you get refuge here in the United States. Any country has a communist revolution, and you're running away from it, you get to live here. Ayn Rand, Robert said Ayn Rand, exactly, Ayn Rand, right? She was an exile from the Soviet Union. And she came here, and look at the horrible, destructive politics Ayn Rand unleashed on this country. Atlas Shrugged and all that crap, right? This policy of allowing in right-wing scum to America. Basically, we have a neon sign we've sent to the international community. Are you a piece of right-wing scum? Come to America. Come to America. No, don't worry about jumping over the bridge. We'll give you a visa as long as you promise to lobby the American government to go further to the right, as long as you promise to try and drive Americans' wages down, as long as you promise to try and deregulate the economy and help us set up prisons for profit and schools for profit, as long as you help us destroy the jobs of teachers and auto workers, as long as you help the FBI go after the Communist Party, as long as you preach anti-communism and make up a bunch of stupid stories, every day in the Soviet Union they would execute a random person just to make everyone afraid. I saw it. And when someone like me comes along and says, it's not actually true, you're lying. I saw it. I fled from the Soviet Union. As long as you talk like Vladimir Jaffe, as long as you're an idiot, as long as you go around saying right-wing lying things, we'd welcome these people in. And this is the problem we have with immigration. That's the problem, right? And nobody on the left wants to talk about that. Nobody on the left wants to talk about it, right? Nobody wants to talk about it. No, the left never talks about this. But this is why the left lose. Look at who was at Trump's rally, right? Who was at Trump's rally? Yeah, I know there were a lot of white workers there who unfortunately had a Confederate flag. I'm not for the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag is an evil symbol of a right-wing rebellion to preserve slavery. It's racist. It's awful. Not for that. But, why don't these liberals ever complain about the Falun Gong? Why don't these liberals ever complain about the Moonies? Why don't the liberals even complain about Netanyahu and all the Israeli flags there, What is it with liberals? I mean, liberals, I swear, liberals just, they don't really, it's like there's only one group of reactionaries that liberals bothered to complain about. Low-income white workers who unfortunately had those racist Confederate flags. Well, if I was there, I would have pulled those racist Confederate flags out of their hands. But that's the only people the liberals bothered to complain about at the January 6th rally. Liberals said nothing about the Falun Gong, nothing about the Epoch Times, nothing about the Moonies, nothing about the Gusanos from Cuba, nothing about the Netanyahu supporters and the Likudniks, nothing about the Shah supporters, the supporters of the Shah, the anti-Iran folks. No, liberals don't have a problem with them. They just don't like low-income white workers. That's who makes them mad, right? We got to drive the wages down of those low-income white workers, right? Teach them a lesson for not going to NYU and learning all about white privilege. We got to teach them a lesson, right? And the fact that Trump was, stirring up crowds of low-income white workers meant he must be a Nazi, because anyone who cares about low-income white workers is a Nazi. Basically, that's how liberals are. I'm sick of it. I'm really, really sick of it. Operation Paperclip. All right. I'm really, really sick of it. I'm sick of the liberals. The liberals basically, the right wing, they appeal with their racism and their demagogy, and then the liberals, it's just basically, all the working class of America are bad because they're just not woke enough. So there you go. All right, so that's my opening remarks for tonight. I hope that was edgy enough for you. I'm sure that the people that have already tried to cancel me a million times will have a field day with that. They'll just lose their minds. Oh my God, Caleb said immigrants are a problem, which is not what I said. It's not what I said at all. But I'm going to take this out of context. This proves that Caleb's a Nazi. No, I'm complaining about the U.S. government having a policy of importing Nazis, you idiot. That's actually kind of the opposite of what I said. Yeah, but I'm not honest. I'm lying. I'm trying to take you out of context because that's what I do. I distort arguments. I'm a liar. I'm a professional liar. Yeah, of course you are. Of course you're a professional liar. I'm not I'm not saying there's anything wrong with anybody on the basis of what country they're from. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with anyone on the basis of their race. I'm saying there's a problem with right-wing fanatics, with actual Nazis and extremists and anti-communists, and we've been importing them into this country. Decade after decade, we've been importing them into this country, and they've ruined our politics. Caleb, I met Falun Gong. They are so creepy. I've met them too, and they are so creepy. North Korean human rights violations. All right. Okay. So there you go. Thank you for all these super chats, folks. I've got a lot of questions to answer, but that's okay. So why don't we do our roll call? And we'll do our roll call. And then I'll start answering these super chats. And then we'll call it a night. How's that? All right, folks. I'm going to drink some unnamed orange beverage. So there you go. Missouri. Mississippi, amazing, Montreal, Hawaii, David in China, Oklahoma, California, Hungary, Cambridge, UK, Alameda, California, Albany, New York, Corona, Brazoria, Texas, Cincinnati, Ohio, Tristan in Maryland, West Palm Beach, Mo in Toronto, Canada, Clydebank, Fairhope, Alabama, Sicily, Lake Elsinore, Nassau County, New York, Char Darling, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Delaware, Pennsylvania, USA, West Palm Beach, KCMO, Liverpool, UK, Madonna in the Islamic Republic of Iran, good friend of the program, Anchorage, Alaska, Arturo, London, UK, Valencia, Venezuela, North Carolina, good intro, says Dust James. Thanks, Dust. Branson, Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, New Jersey, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Grand Canyon, Arizona, Antioch, California. Super excited to hear you, says Metches, the fantastic and professional nanny. Smiley face. Very good. Melbourne, Australia, New York, Canada, Winlock, Washington, Long Island, New York, Los Angeles, New York City, Venezuela, Singapore, Sharon in Alabama, Seattle. Thank you for everything you do, Caleb, says Keith. Thank you for everything that you do. All right, Kieran from San Diego, Benton Harbor, Michigan, Houston, Gallon, North Carolina, Northern California, Allende, Mexico, Washington, Mosin from Iran, Adelaide, Australia, Seattle, Detroit, Tasmania, Southern California gang, United Kingdom, Calcutta, India, CPIM supporter, a supporter of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Kiran from Pakistan, communist immigrant. Welcome, Kiran. Welcome. Indonesia, Brooklyn, McKees Rocks, Glasgow, California, Valencia, Venezuela, Michigan, Tom Foley, proud birth state of Gus Hall, Pomona, California, Quebec City, Eugene, Oregon, London, England, Brazil, Portland, Maine, Los Angeles, a good deep massage in Joshua Tree, California, Calgary, Canada, Messina, Sicily. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very, 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 very good. Who else is here? Who else is with us tonight? Corpus Christi, Joyce and Arnold, welcome. Naples, Florida, Harold Sullivan, welcome, welcome. Who else is with us tonight? Who else? Happy Young's Day in Iran. I don't know what Young's Day is. You'll have to share that with us, Madonna. Tell us what that means. Condell in San Diego. Condell in San Diego. Daniel in Seattle. Welcome, Daniel. All righty. All right. San Antonio, Texas. Sydney, Australia. I'm here from China, says T. Awesome, T. Glad you're here. Glad you're tuning in. Good stuff. You should check out their channel, Red Comrades in China. Good stuff. Glasgow, Scotland. Very, very good. Glasgow, Scotland. Joseph in New Zealand. Very, very good. Good stuff. On fire tonight, says Harold Sullivan. I'm glad. I'm glad to be here, folks. Alrighty, so let's start answering these super chat questions. If you've got more questions, just keep them rolling in. Comrades in China. Ithaca, New York. Michael is here. Welcome, welcome. All right, all right. First question was about Karl Kautsky. Karl Kautsky was the leader of the German Social Democratic Party, which was the biggest Marxist party in the world before World War I. Karl Kautsky personally, he actually was he edited Karl Marx's personal notebooks after his death. and he published a number of his writings. Caleb is a hero we are so lucky to have, and he doesn't even wear a pair of red underwear on the outside. Thank you. Oh, well, thank you, Fluff Fluff. I appreciate it. Um, uh, but um, but yeah, Kautsky, he was a friend of Karl Marx. He translated or he edited a number of Karl Marx's notebooks after Karl Marx's death. I believe Grundrisse, which is an important, it's considered like Capital Volume 4, Theories of Surplus Value, which is Capital Volume 3. They were put together based on Karl Marx's notebooks by Karl Kautsky. And Karl Kautsky was one of the main promoters of Marxism after the death of Karl Marx. After Karl Marx died, you had the Marxist movement in Europe really exploding, and Karl Kautsky was the man who did it. At the time of Marx's death, Marx wasn't very well known. I mean, he was kind of well known. He wrote for the New York Tribune, but his funeral was attended by like 11 people. But the German Social Democratic Party, the SPD, it took off. And Karl Kautsky was the leader of the SPD, and he promoted Marxism. And, he wrote a number of very important books about Marxism. He wrote a book that I've often made reference to. I used it a lot in my speech, in my presentation on the Roman Empire, Is America the New Rome? I quoted heavily from a book he wrote called The Foundations of Christianity, which is a very good interpretation of Christianity and where it came from, fall of the Roman Empire, Jesus' life, etc. But there's other books by Karl Kautsky. Karl Kautsky was an important figure. Unfortunately, however, when World War I came around, all right, best books on China. When World War I came around, Karl Kautsky, he supported World War I. And that was not good. And then after World War I, when the Bolsheviks had a revolution, he declared that the revolution wasn't democratic enough. And so Lenin wrote a book criticizing him called The Proletarian Revolution, and the Renegade Kautsky, which is very good. He made his contribution, but ultimately, when push came to shove, he wasn't revolutionary. He had built the SPD, which was this huge political organization of millions of people, but it was a machine under capitalism. It was not a revolutionary organization. And when the moment came, when the war came, he sold out, and then he didn't support the Bolsheviks. So Kautsky, while he did a lot to promote Marxism, ultimately he proved himself to not be revolutionary when the time came. When the rubber met the road, he wasn't where it was at. He was not where it needed to be. Alrighty, okay, all right. So third worldists, their argument that a revolution in the imperial core would not be good because it's a settler revolution. Oh boy, okay. So there's a number of things wrong with that. All right. So first of all, a revolution in the imperial core would not be good because it would be a settler revolution. Well, I assume that what they're saying is if Euro settlers, if white American workers, who they consider to be Euro settlers, were to rise up and rebel, that would be like a fascist or a racist insurrection, so it wouldn't be good. Well, obviously, I would oppose that, and that wouldn't be good, but that wouldn't be a revolution. That would not be a revolution in the imperial core. That would be fascism. That would be a counter-revolution, right? If there was a racist uprising or a right-wing uprising, by the labor aristocracy or something, that wouldn't be a revolution. An actual revolution in the imperial core would be anti-racist. It would be black and white, united fight, and it wouldn't be racist. So if there were some kind of right-wing uprising, that wouldn't be good, but that would not be, a quote-unquote settler revolution. So that's a very confused question. Look, I have long maintained that third worldism is not correct. That third worldism is an excuse. It's basically an excuse to not go out and organize people. It's a way to say, you know what, all the Americans are evil, and so we're not gonna go organize them. They're all evil, and it's a way to justify paralysis. I mean, I don't even know what that means. I really don't even know what that means, and I've had, third worldists try to tell me, well, that's not really what it means. Well, then why be a third worldist? Look, labor aristocracy is a real thing. The aristocracy of labor, the stratification of the working class is a reality. But right now, what's happening in the first world is that we are seeing the demolition of the labor aristocracy. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing the demolition of the labor aristocracy. So that's right now is more than ever an opportunity to build solidarity. So there you go. So if Marx was wrong on Hegel, is Marx wrong? Well, no. I mean, first of all, I mean, Hegel has many interpretations, and Marxism was inspired by Hegel, but there are many differences between Marx and Hegel. Now, Marx's interpretation of Hegel, if you're arguing that Marx interpreted Hegel incorrectly, does that mean that Marx's theories are not correct? No, not necessarily. Marx was inspired by Hegel, and he had a specific interpretation of Hegel. But if he interpreted Hegel wrong, Marx's theories are not Hegel's theories. Hegel had the concept of the dialectic and historical progress. Marx, said, historical materialism and dialectical materialism. So his idea, Hegel viewed the dialectic in terms of the struggle of ideas. Hegel was a big advocate of Christianity. Marx was an atheist. Marx was not Hegel. And, at the beginning of his life, Marx was referred to as a left Hegelian. But ultimately, Marx's ideas are a complete break with Hegel. Hegel was not a materialist at all. So yeah, I just think that's not correct. I don't think that's a concern. All right, Rosa Luxemburg. If I'm not mistaken, before I get to Rosa Luxemburg, I know that one of the critiques of Karl Marx that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had was related to Hegel. Marx argued that, or Dr. Martin Luther King argued that Marx had incorrectly interpreted Hegel. Oh my goodness, best Mark. Oh boy. All right, writing it down. Groups to join. Alrighty. So, next question. Alrighty. Rosa Luxemburg. Rosa Luxemburg was a Polish-born communist who lived in Germany, and she, while Karl Kautsky sold out the revolution and supported World War I, Rosa Luxemburg became an anti-war activist, and she became famous in the socialist movement of Germany because she took a stand against World War I. She went to prison for opposing World War I, and then after World War I, she led a revolutionary uprising in 1919. The Spartacist Bund was her organization. Spartacus Bund. She joined the Spartacus Bund. She founded it, and she was killed. The Social Democrats of Germany put down the uprising in 1919. Rosa Luxemburg, her main thing, she extensively wrote against Edward Bernstein and his theory of gradual revolution reformism. Rosa Luxemburg was the main anti-war activist in Germany during World War I. She had differences with Lenin. She did not agree with Lenin on the national question. She opposed all nationalism, whereas Lenin said that nationalism of oppressed groups is progressive. Rosa Luxemburg was a great revolutionary who made great sacrifices to oppose World War I and ultimately gave her life in the middle of a revolutionary crisis in Germany. The workers had overthrown the Kaiser, and then the Social Democrats did not want to create a socialist Germany, and they didn't create one. Even though the workers had already overthrown the government, the German Social Democrats created the Weimar Republic and did not write a socialist constitution. So Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, they took to the streets, they revolted with the Spartacus Bund, and they were ultimately executed. So, or they were not executed, they were just kind of murdered. I think Rosa Luxemburg is a great figure. She wrote a manifesto for the Spartacus Bund. What does the Spartacus League want? And it's her manifesto for her revolutionary group in Germany. It is exciting. Go and read that pamphlet. What does the Spartacus League want? That is a revolutionary manifesto, if you've ever read it. I mean, it's full of revolutionary energy if you read it. Go and read What Does the Spartacus League Want by Rosa Luxemburg. One of the most exciting documents I've ever read. So there you go. Anarcho-syndicalism. Anarcho-syndicalism is it's a form of Marxism, I wouldn't call it a form of Marxism. It's a left-wing theory that argues that rather than trying to seize political power, that the focus should be on class struggle on the job. It should be on strikes and labor union organizing, with the eventual goal of the workers seizing their individual factories. That's anarcho-syndicalism, right? And it argues that every factory would be autonomous, but the workers would be the owners. It talks about how there one day will be a great general strike that will happen where the workers will overthrow the bosses. The industrial workers of the world, the IWW, they were anarcho-syndicalists. I think Noam Chomsky talks about being an anarcho-syndicalist. And it's a left-wing view. Syndicalism was the wing of the socialist movement that opposed all political action. It favored just class struggle on the job. Anarcho-syndicalism, I think, is, in addition to being only supporting class struggle on the job, would oppose any kind of central plan after the revolution. It would want every factory to be autonomous. That's what anarcho-syndicalism is. There's not four corresponding banks, my friend. There's a couple. There's two particular banks, but it's not four. So that's not what I'm saying. History on their rise. No, I'm not well versed in economic history. I would have to do a lot of research. I have studied about the Rockefellers quite a bit. So there you go. Alrighty. Okay. Eastern Bloc, did it fall for the same reasons as the USSR? Similar reasons, but not the same, right? There were different contradictions in each of those countries. One factor, in Poland and in Romania, and in a number of Eastern Bloc countries, the United States had kind of created, economic problems, right? That the United States worked very hard to try and manipulate Poland against the Soviet Union, manipulate Romania against the Soviet Union. This was Brzezinski's strategy, right? Try to play socialist countries against each other. And in the 80s in Poland, you had U.S. banks that were giving loans to the Polish government, manipulating Poland, and austerity then was implemented in order to pay back those loans. The same thing happened in Romania. That was definitely a factor. That happened in Czechoslovakia, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And that was a factor you didn't have in the Soviet Union, which was U.S. banks, pouring money into these countries, getting them in debt. That contributed to the color revolutions. But ultimately, the same group of people was used to carry out the color revolutions, and that was the most privileged people in the country. I mean, the people that overthrew socialism in Poland and Czechoslovakia and East Germany and Romania were the children of the party elite. They were the most privileged people in the country, whose parents were leaders of the communist party, who they were intellectuals, college students, writers, college professors. It was the intellectual layer, right? The intellectual strata, the scientists, those kind of people. Your average factory worker, wanted to keep socialism intact. And after the fall of the Eastern Bloc country, and country after country, the people voted for communist or socialist parties back into power. A lot of times they'd change their ideology to democratic socialism or something like that. The average working class people across the Eastern Bloc and in Russia itself, they voted, in favor of keeping socialism. They were sympathetic to the Marxist-Leninist governments. It was that layer of intellectuals, privileged folks that felt stifled. And a lot of those folks didn't even realize they were marching to restore capitalism. A lot of them thought they were just trying to overthrow the Communist Party, make the country more democratic. And they really did believe the United States was, it was a happy, happy fun land. That the United States was a land of blue jeans and Beatles albums and rock music. And that the United States didn't want to destroy Russia, didn't want to destroy Eastern Europe. They were convinced the USA would help them overthrow the socialist government, and they could keep all their guaranteed jobs and health care, etc. But they'd be able to shop at Walmart, and they'd have more freedom of speech. They didn't understand that the United States would overthrow the Communist Party and then economically demolish the country with shock therapy economics. They did not understand that. And that's what happened. In every country after the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Eastern Bloc, you had shock therapy economics that destroyed these countries. Sex trafficking, mass unemployment, hunger. And there were cities in Ukraine that suddenly only had electricity for a couple hours a day. The electricity couldn't even come on. That's how bad it was, right? But a lot of the people that were supporting Boris Yeltsin, a lot of the people that marched in East Germany and in Czechoslovakia didn't understand that. And that's why the synthetic left, the fake left, was so important, right? manipulating people in the Eastern Bloc, people in the Soviet Communist Party, the Gorbachev wing of the Communist Party, to think the United States wasn't so bad. That was very, very key in bringing down the socialist countries, right? And the liberals had a lot to do with that, right? Ronald Reagan was a raving anti-communist, but the fact that there were joint rallies against nuclear weapons all throughout the 1980s, they would have rallies against nuclear power and nuclear weapons in the Soviet Union and in the United States, and it would be on the same day. They'd have marches against nuclear power, marches against nuclear weapons, and the liberals in the United States would march against nuclear power because it wasn't environmental, and against nuclear weapons for peace. And the Soviet Gorbachev wing, the anti-communists, they would march, and it was seen as, and if you read The Aquarian Conspiracy by Marilyn Ferguson, she talks about this. There's this global movement. It's not anti-communist or pro-communist. It just wants freedom. This was the CIA, right? That was the spiritual advisor of Al Gore, Marilyn Ferguson, this hippie guru from Southern California who was on the payroll of the CIA. That's what they were doing, the hippie movement, the counterculture. All of this was key in bringing down the Soviet Union. And it took liberals to do it, right? If it had just been Ronald Reagan, if all that had happened is Ronald Reagan escalated the arms race, the Soviet Union would have felt more under attack. More people would have become, anti-U.S. There would have been a rally. It wasn't an economic overthrow. The arms race certainly hurt the Soviet Union, forced them to spend a lot of money on nuclear weapons they didn't need, catch up. They talk about, Michael Parenti talks about how it was an arms catch up, not really an arms race. The Soviets were constantly being forced to spend money, but that's not what brought down the Soviet Union. What brought down the Soviet Union was that Gorbachev and his allies, the moderate wing of the Soviet Communist Party, threw in the towel. They threw in the towel because they were convinced the United States wasn't so bad. They had been duped, and a huge amount of propaganda and manipulation and covert operations went into building up the synthetic left, the hippie movement, to convince people in the Soviet Union that the United States wasn't so bad, and that there were a lot of Americans. Look, in the Soviet Union, many people believed Noam Chomsky was a household name in the United States. He was not. Most people in the United States have never heard of Noam Chomsky. However, in the Soviet Union, most people believed Noam Chomsky was on Soviet TV all the time, and they believed that in America he was on TV all the time. He wasn't. I know people who went to the Soviet Union in the 80s, and people would say to them, "Wow, you're a communist from the United States. I've heard that in America the Communist Party is small. It only has like 1 million members." No, it didn't have 1 million members. It had like less than 10,000 members. I mean, Trotskyism and synthetic left the same. Not exactly, but we'll talk about that. It was building up that illusion, right? And it was that kind of manipulation of the Soviet Union. I heard a really sad story from a woman I knew who went to the Soviet Union, and she went there in the 80s. And she said that the people who believed in communism in the 80s were the old people. There were old folks who'd been through World War II, who were like lower level, local party people. And those folks believed in communism with all their heart and soul. But it was like kind of the young people, the flashy new young people who were, kind of the superstars of the Gorbachev wing, who were in the Communist Party. They're the ones that would say right-wing anti-communist things. This woman I knew years ago, she was a communist. She'd worked at a kind of a performing arts summer camp in the Soviet Union, and she was talking to one of these Communist Party, from the Gorbachev wing of the Communist Party, one of these hotshot young people that was in the Soviet Communist Party in the 80s, a Gorbachevist, and he said to her, "Well, we in the Soviet Union, we want to learn from America. We need to have freedom like you have in America." And she said, "We don't really have freedom in America." Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panther Party, he was building a communist group and the FBI murdered him, she said. And this young guy, who was younger than her, who was a Communist Party leader, who was a Gorbachevist, said to her, "Oh, but he was a black. He was a black. And blacks are troublemakers. He must have done something to because America, I've seen it. They have anti-war protests there all the time. He was a black. He must have done something." I mean, it was unbelievable what this guy said. But that was kind of the attitude, right? And that this Gorbachev wing of the Communist Party was so enamored with the United States that that they were kind of, they were kind of delusional about what the United States was really like. So, that's why the synthetic left is dangerous. Look, only Obama could have killed Gaddafi. It took Obama. If any other president had done it, especially if it had been a Republican, there would have been way more protests, way more dissent. But look, it took the first black president of the United States, a man with a Muslim middle name, Hussein, to carry out and stage the overthrow of Libya. It took Obama to destroy Syria. The synthetic left is very valuable to the imperialists, and a lot of leftists don't get that, right? They think it's like lesser of two evils. No, it's more effective of the two evils, as Black Agenda Report often says. Next question. Will there be annoying Hollywood gossip in socialist America? I hate to say this. I know it's not what you want to hear. I bet you there will be. Look, in any society, there's going to be movies. People are going to like those movies. There's going to be people in those movies who are very skilled actors or who are very good looking, and people are going to want to know about those people. They're going to, they're going to want to find out about their lives. So yes, unfortunately, I think there will probably be annoying Hollywood gossip in socialist countries. I think that's just going to be the case. I really doubt that a socialist society will eliminate annoying Hollywood gossip. Now, it obviously won't be commercialized in the same way. I obviously, when you have an economy that's not centered around making profits, it's going to be a little bit different. But yes, I expect there will be Hollywood gossip, in socialist countries. All right. Banning capitalist speech in socialist societies. Well, look, the reason that socialist societies historically have been very authoritarian is because they are under attack, right? 15 countries invaded the Soviet Union right after the Russian Revolution. China, was invaded. They had the Tibet Civil War. The USA imposed horrendous sanctions on them. Then the USA invaded, Korea and threatened China. These countries haven't been able to just develop in a vacuum. The countries that had socialist revolutions in the 20th century, they were fighting for their lives, and because they were fighting for their lives and under attack, they became very authoritarian. Originally, there were three parties after the Russian Revolution. There was the Bolsheviks, there was the left Mensheviks, and the left socialist revolutionaries. And the United States, the United States invaded. So did 15 other countries. They invaded. There was a civil war. A member of the left Socialist Revolutionary Party shot Lenin, and eventually there was only one party. The Bolsheviks didn't want to have a one-party state. They were forced to develop one. And the same thing happened in Nicaragua. Right? The Sandinistas, they said, we're not like the Soviets. We're going to be democratic socialists. We're not Marxists. We're Sandinistas. We're Marxist Christians. And they took power, and the United States started funding terrorists and drug gangs, and they had to form a secret police, right? And there were all these reports about the Sandinistas, they had a secret police force. Well, you bet they did. If your country's being invaded and attacked and your harbors are being bombed, and and the Sandinistas, they were very unhappy, but they took power saying, look, we're going to be ultra-democratic. We're not going to be like the Soviets. We're not going to be Stalinists. And pretty soon they were forced to set up a secret police force, and they were forced to start doing some of the authoritarian things they denounced the Soviets for doing. Why? Okay. Any socialist country have free press, and they were forced to do that. Now, one thing that must be pointed out is that I have been to Venezuela, and I have never seen a country bend over backwards so much to accommodate the opposition. In Venezuela, the opposition, the people who want to overthrow Venezuela's government, the capitalists, the people engaging in capitalist speech, are everywhere. They're on TV. They have advertisements on TV. They have whole TV networks they control. They have people marching in the streets. They run in the elections. But yet, I turn on American TV and I hear it's a brutal dictatorship. There is plenty of capitalist speech in Venezuela, but that doesn't prevent the United States from declaring them a brutal dictatorship. Bolivia, under Evo Morales, plenty of capitalist speech, plenty of people who didn't support Evo Morales, they still say it's a dictatorship. Nicaragua, there is plenty of capitalist speech in Nicaragua. USA still says it's a brutal dictatorship. I know people in China. There are people in China Not even Chinese people, Americans. There are American expats all over China talking shit against the Chinese government, repeating lies of American propaganda against the Chinese government, all over China. And no, they don't get arrested. They're not even from there, right? It's one. I mean, it's one thing if if the people from there are doing it. These are foreigners. China. Not only do they allow capitalist speech to go on, they allow foreigners from a country that's imposing sanctions on them to come into China and talk shit against the government and spread American media and propaganda everywhere. So the idea that there is not capitalist speech legal in socialist countries, obviously socialist countries don't have the same level of freedom of speech that we have in the West. But, I've been to Venezuela, loads of capitalist speech there. I've been to Ecuador under Correa, loads of capitalist speech there. There's loads of capitalist speech in China. So, I think you've got it a little bit wrong. I want a society with total freedom. I want a society of total freedom. That's only possible as we move toward communism, right? As we move toward a stateless, classless world of material abundance. The reason that we have states and governments to begin with is because of scarcity, right? If there was so much stuff and so much abundance out there that people didn't have to work, people could just take what they need, you wouldn't have to have laws because no one would get jailed for stealing and no one would be trying to hurt anyone else to take their stuff. Right? If you had a stateless, classless world, not only would you have total freedom of speech, you'd have total freedom to do what you wanted. You wouldn't even need a government, right? The goal of socialism is to build up material abundance and to create and to advance technology so we can get to a world with so much stuff that the need for the state withers away. There is no ideology that is more based on freedom and more understanding of how real freedom can be achieved than communism. Marxism is the only ideology that understands that freedom is not based on morality. It's not like there are good countries that have freedom and bad countries that don't have it. That freedom is based on economic development, right? And when society gets to the point that there's vast material abundance, there will be total freedom, right? And that's the thing. If you can get to a society with no scarcity, with no hunger, with no lack of resources, from each according to their own ability to each according to their need, then you can have total freedom, right? So Marxism, if you want freedom of speech, you want freedom of assembly, you want freedom of religion, you want freedom not to be forced to work, you want freedom to pick your own job, you should be a communist because this is the only ideology that understands how that could really be achieved, how a post-scarcity world could do that. Every other ideology sees freedom in the context of right and wrong in a vacuum and doesn't understand the economic base. Marxists have what's called historical materialism. And because of that, we have the ability to lead humanity on the road to true freedom. All right. Mass shootings and capitalist decay. Mass shootings and capitalist decay. Absolutely. Look, the fact that our society is so alienating and there is so much antisocial behavior and antisocial thought that we continue to have instances of people going out and committing mass murder, that we continue to have a high rate of suicide. I mean, look, a lot of these mass shooters are people that would be suicidal. It's the same kind of mindset as someone who's suicidal, except somehow their suicidal, tendency is transformed. There's a difference that somehow leads their suicidal tendency to become murderous, right? Most people that are suicidal don't want to hurt anyone. They just want to hurt themselves. But it's the same kind of mental illness that drives suicide, but it's an extreme form of suicide, right? They talk about depression is internalized anger. Anger is externalized depression. And I guess these people that are mass murderers, mass shooters, their internalized depression, gets over-externalized into anger. Now, there are a lot of people that wonder about the role of psych meds in this, right? They wonder if maybe psych meds are a danger, in some cases, turn a suicidal person into a murderous person. Now, there's been a lot of theories about that. You can read about that. I am not an expert on these things, not a psychiatrist, but some people question, we have this very, very highly medicated society where all kinds of people are taking, I think 1 in 5 people in the United States is taking psych meds at this point. And some people wonder if psych meds are sometimes the ingredient that takes that suicidal person and gives them kind of the burst that turns their suicidal feelings into murderous feelings. But that's just one theory, and I'm not a scientist. I don't know. I don't have the theories. What's your take on anarchist anthropologists who argue that many human societies were egalitarian despite scarcity? All right. Anarchist scarcity. Egalitarian. That's a very good question, and I will answer that because you have to be. There's a very important point that must be made about that. So I'll answer that one right now. That one that just came in, I'm going to answer it right now because. All right. So Chaya asked about what about anarchist anthropologists who say that societies. What about those who say communism may work well in small groups but not in larger groups like whole countries? All right. Communism in small groups. We'll get to that one later. But about these people that say, well, anarchists say scarcity societies were completely egalitarian. What does egalitarian mean? Egalitarian means that there's no classes. No one's exploiting anyone else. And that's true. That's true. Egalitarian is not the opposite of authoritarian. All right, and this is what a lot of people don't get. That it's true. On hunter-gatherer civilization, nobody was exploiting anybody else. Every member of that tribe of 20 to 30 people was pretty much equal. If you were a hunter and you killed the animal, you might get the best cuts of the meat. In some cases, they worshipped women. There'd be a woman in the tribe who was considered to be the sorceress or the spiritual person who gave spiritual guidance, and she might be exalted as the leader. It was a matriarchy, so it tended to be women who had the higher positions. But other than that, it was probably the most egalitarian society we've ever seen. Those societies were definitely egalitarian in the sense there weren't any classes. There were no slaves. There were no masters. There were no capitalists. There was no exploitation. Everyone was pretty much equal for the most part. And actually, one thing that's been documented about primitive communism or theorized is that on some level the human mind was not as individualistic, that people did not have consciousness yet, largely. Like they talk about human consciousness didn't emerge until several thousand years ago. So on some level these people weren't even thinking in words, right? They were not thinking in words. They spoke and they did communicate with each other, but they did not have a consciousness in their minds. And that on some level, it's debated whether or not people even had names, right? People's whole identity was with the group, right? You talk about human beings being collective creatures. In primitive communism or tribal communalism, people's whole identity was with their tribe. That people's sense of individuality hadn't even fully developed yet. That there have been changes in the human mind neurologically, that we are much more individual in a neurological sense. We have a consciousness. We have our own thoughts now. People didn't even have their own thoughts back then. People were somewhat closer to ants in an ant farm or something back then. Yes, it was the most egalitarian, and it was the majority of human existence. But is egalitarian the same as not authoritarian? No. I would argue that primitive communism was probably the most authoritarian society that we'd ever seen. Look, if you're in a tribe like that, where you're depending on 20 or 30 people just to fill your stomach with food, somebody is not pulling their weight, you think you're just going to go, oh, he doesn't feel like working today. That's fine. Think about it, right? You're in a tribe of 20 to 30 people. There's a life expectancy of about 25, right? You're barely getting enough nutritional substance. The whole group has to work together in order to get food. And somebody's like, hey, I'm not going to work today. I don't feel like it. You all do my work. Do you think there's not going to be consequences for that person? Do you think that the group is not going to find a way to deal with that person? I can assure you that, if we look back at the fact that people probably didn't even have names, people didn't even have a sense of individualism, those hunter-gatherer societies were the most egalitarian, but they were not the most non-authoritarian. And that's an important distinction to make. And we confuse that sometimes. People think that egalitarian and authoritarian are opposites, and that's not the case. You can have a very authoritarian society where everyone's equal. and you can have a very free society with mass inequality. So that's an important point that you raised there, and that's one of my biggest pet peeves is, there's all this stuff about the noble savages, and anarchists do this all the time. They have this belief that hunter-gatherer civilization, there were no rules. There were plenty of rules. There were very intense religious beliefs. They worshipped women. People had people had very, very, very high expectations on them. People were very dependent on each other. So you can't say that those societies were not authoritarian, but were they egalitarian? Absolutely, absolutely. Egalitarian in scarcity. Yes. All right. Okay. Was Saddam Hussein a progressive socialist? Well, look, Saddam Hussein was definitely a socialist. The Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party. They seized power. They put the banks, factories, and industries of Iraq under public ownership. They had a planned economy. I don't think Saddam Hussein was a very good leader, honestly, when he invaded Iraq on behalf of the U.S. imperialists and murdered, when he invaded Iran on behalf of the U.S. imperialists and murdered, many hundreds of thousands of Iranians, and was getting supported by the United States in doing so. That was horrendous, and that was awful. Saddam Hussein, I think that a lot of his policies and his leadership was pretty problematic, honestly. But was he a socialist? Yeah, he was a socialist, and it was a socialist society. There were some big achievements in terms of economic development. Look, the New York Times admits that prior to the Gulf War of 1991, Iraq had the highest life expectancy of any Middle Eastern country, right? He did build a lot of hospitals. He did build a lot of schools. And a lot of people will say, this is a common statement that people will make about Iraq, which is not an accurate statement. People will say, oh, look, Saddam Hussein was such a bad leader. But look, the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, and it just fell apart. That's a you don't understand. The United States destruction of Iraq was a very long process, okay? First, the United States tricked Iraq into invading Kuwait, right? Kuwait, and Iraq had a long-standing rivalry. The brutal monarchy of Kuwait and the United States and Iraq didn't get along with each other. Iraq asked permission from the United States to invade Kuwait, and the U.S. government told Iraq they had permission to invade Kuwait. No one ever talks about that. Iraq was directly asking to the United States, can we invade Kuwait? The USA said, go for it, and gave them permission to invade Kuwait. So Iraq invaded Kuwait. Then the United States had a media hysterical campaign. Oh my God, Saddam Hussein's invading Kuwait. And they had the Naria testimony with the little girl who was on there. The babies, they're taking the babies off. And they had this hysterical campaign. Iraq realized the United States was going to send its forces into Kuwait. So the Iraqis retreated from Kuwait because they had invaded Kuwait under the impression that they were allowed to invade Kuwait. And so the Iraqis, when the United States sent its forces in, the Iraqis retreated from Kuwait, and the United States then murdered the Iraqis on the highway. There was the highway of death, and killed the Iraqis, slaughtered the Iraqi army, and shot them in the back like cowards as they were retreating. No one talks about this. The Gulf War was one of the most cowardly wars in history. The USA basically told Iraq to invade Kuwait. Then Iraq invaded Kuwait. And then when Iraq found out they weren't allowed to invade Kuwait, they retreated, and the U.S. military killed them as they were retreating. And they talk about, they had a military draft. There were a lot of young teenagers, right? 14-year-old kids in Saddam Hussein's army. Again, was Saddam Hussein good? I don't think drafting 14-year-old kids and sending them to invade Kuwait was a good thing. But, a lot of 14-year-old kids were drafted, they invaded Kuwait, and they were on the highway retreating, and the U.S. military bombed and blew them up. Most cowardly war. Unbelievable. So after that war, during that war, the United States bombed Iraq's power plants, bombed Iraq's water treatment facilities, and then throughout the 1990s, every time Iraq would start to rebuild its power plants or its water facilities, the United States would bomb Iraq again. And this happened over and over and over again. So for a whole decade, the United States was softening up Iraq. and it prevented them from getting chlorine, so their water treatments, their water couldn't get treated, and as a result, 1.2 million people died as a result of those sanctions, including about 500,000 children under the age of 12. So from 1991 until the U.S. invaded in 2003, for that whole time, the United States was bombing Iraq, was weakening their economy with sanctions. So the idea that Saddam Hussein was such a bad leader, look, the USA invaded in 2003 and the country just fell apart. No, the USA spent a decade pounding on Iraq and pounding on Iraq and pounding on Iraq and pounding on Iraq and waiting to get Iraq weak enough that they could then invade. So that, it was the war in Iraq didn't begin in 2003 with shock and awe. It really began in the early 90s, right? The USA had backed Iraq against against Iran and supported Iraq, but then when Iran started losing the war, then the United States started backing Iran. The USA saw the Iranians, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and the Ba'athist Arab Socialists of Iraq as two anti-imperialist forces. And so the idea was to play them against each other. And at first they supported Iraq and they supported Saddam Hussein, but then about halfway through the war, they switched and the United States started supporting Iran. And it was back and forth, and the idea was to weaken both sides. And it did, and it killed at least 1 million people died in that war. The USA supplied Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons that he used against the Iranians. That's a war crime. And the United States supplied, satellite support to help Saddam Hussein use chemical weapons against the Iranians. It was awful. But this is Brzezinski's strategy for controlling Eurasia, right? Is Brzezinski's, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the U.S. foreign policy strategist. He said that the method of the United States is to, quote, keep the barbarians killing each other, right? Rather than have the United States directly fight, its rivals, instead manipulate them against each other. And, the Iranian revolution, they're Shia Muslims, very religious, right? Not Arabs, they're Persians. They're not nationalists. They're for Islam. They're not for any kind of nationalism, right? Saddam Hussein was an Iraqi Ba'ath Arab nationalist and a socialist. A secular government in Iraq led by a Sunni named Saddam Hussein, a Shia Muslim religious government in Iran, that rejects all nationalism. The Persians and the Arabs have a long history of not getting along with each other. You add to that Saddam Hussein is a secular leader who hates Shia Muslims and persecuted Shia Muslims because he thought they were ignorant and religious. It was a nightmare, right? It was very carefully manipulated to serve U.S. foreign policy, and it was kind of like the war in Yemen, and that the U.S. media it kind of covered up the war. You wouldn't even know it was happening. Like U.S. media kind of pretended it never happened. CFR put out a report that the U.S. You should read. The gist is double down on Atlanticist policy. All right. New CFR report. All right. Very good. All right. Okay. So, why do political liberals not address neoliberalism? Because they agree with it. No, the liberals, liberals in the United States, political liberals, they have realized that addressing economic issues, if they address economic issues, that gets them in trouble, right? That there's a lot of money in the United States to fund free market libertarianism and neoliberal economics. And, the Democrats have realized they can look radical and they can look like they're fighting the Republicans if they fight them, on cultural issues like gay marriage, like race issues and such. But there is a political cost. If you start talking about economics, suddenly a lot of the big corporations who donate to the Democratic Party aren't going to donate, right? That cultural issues are safe to talk about, right? A lot of the major corporations support Black Lives Matter at this point. Yet, if you start talking about economics, suddenly, big corporations that are impacted by your left-wing economic policies are not going to donate to you. That's the issue. All right. Sorry, I'm going to pour some more unnamed orange beverage here. I'm going to keep talking here. A lot of super chats to get through, but that's okay. Keep them coming in. Keep them coming in. We're doing our thing. Alrighty. New sanctions on China. Yeah, I mean, the United States is just escalating the trade war with China. I don't think it's directly related to this Alaska stuff. It's about China's economy zooming ahead while we're still locked down and suffering under the pandemic. China has recovered from the pandemic, and we have not. And so China is an economic threat. So the USA is trying to strangle China economically to make up, for the fact that China's moved ahead. All right, Michael Hudson and Pepe Escobar. Michael Hudson is a Marxist economist, and he's written a lot about economics. I like his work a lot. Pepe Escobar is a reporter and a journalist. I've met Pepe Escobar in Iran. I attended the New Horizon conference, which he attended as well. Michael Hudson focuses on economics and the nature of capitalism. Pepe Escobar focuses on anti-imperialism. So yeah, Ba'ath was socialistic, but not Saddam. He executed key party members, came to power, started a war with Iraq, Syria, Ba'athists, backed Iran in the revolution. Oh, yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. I'm not a big fan of Saddam Hussein. I'll just be honest. I'm not. So thank you for giving us your insight there. All right. NATO and the EU dissolve. Well, look, the European Union, at this point, Britain is out of the European Union. So the European Union, I think distance between the European Union and Britain and distance between the European Union and the United States is going to increase. And look, this Nord Stream 2 issue is very, very important. It's very important because, look, the European Union countries want Nord Stream 2, and the United States is trying to bully them out of getting it and trying to bully them into buying natural gas from the United States. But NATO, NATO, I don't know. I mean, NATO is something that it seems like Biden is very, very committed to keeping NATO intact. I'll tell you that much. Oh, boy. All righty. How do we persuade young leftists to defend socialism with their fear of being canceled? Well, I think you have to get them to understand that, first of all, that the anti-imperialist countries help them. The reason we have Social Security in the United States is because of the Soviet Union. The reason we have labor unions and the reason that we have working class protections on the job is because of the Soviet Union. Look, what was the biggest strike wave in all of American history? The biggest strike that ever happened was in 1887. 1887, the railroad workers of the United States went on strike. And what did they get? What did they win? Nothing. They did not win a thing. They were brutally suppressed. A whole bunch of workers got killed. It was the biggest strike. There's never been a strike bigger than the 1887, railroad strike. But 1934, in 1934, there was a strike in one city, San Francisco. The dock workers went on strike. There was a strike in another city, Minneapolis. The Trotskyites led the Teamsters Union on strike. There was a strike in Toledo, Ohio, among the auto light workers. And there was a sharecroppers strike all throughout the South. Okay? 1934. The 1934 strikes were way smaller than the 1887 strikes. But in response to the 1934 strikes, we got the Wagner Act, which legalized labor unions and created the National Labor Relations Board, so labor unions were protected. We got a program to hire the unemployed. Roosevelt immediately hired millions of unemployed people and put them to work building bridges and highways. And we got the beginning of Social Security. And finally, in 1937, we got Social Security. Why, here is the question, why in 1887 did we have a huge strike wave that won absolutely nothing? And in 1934, have a much smaller strike wave that won Social Security, government jobs guarantee with the Works Progress Administration, and legalization of labor unions. Why? Because in 1934, the strikes were aligned with the Soviet Union. I'm just being real. Just being real. The Soviet Union existed in 1934, and it was having an economic boom. It was having the 5-year plans. It was industrializing rapidly. 1887, there was no socialist country in the world. And in 1934, when the dock workers of San Francisco went on strike and shut down the docks of San Francisco. When the Teamsters, the truck drivers of Minneapolis went on strike and seized control of the city, the strike committee basically became the government of the city of San Francisco, of Minneapolis. When the auto light workers, went on strike, there was a general strike in Toledo, Ohio. It was understood that these strikes were led by people who supported the Soviet Union. And these strikes could be the beginning of a Bolshevik revolution here in the United States. Right? And that's what the newspapers all said. They said these strikes were the beginning of a revolution. With the Soviet Union existing, the bosses were forced to make much bigger concessions. And in fact, in 1935, the year after the strike wave of 1934 that shut the country down, the USA recognized the Soviet Union. At the same time, it passed Social Security and unemployment insurance, and it also recognized the Soviet Union. And why did the USA recognize the Soviet Union? Because they hoped that if they negotiated with the Soviet leaders would tell the American communists to calm down. That was a big factor. Right? So, the reason we have so much, the reason FDR passed all those reforms was because of the Soviet Union. So, being a socialist in the United States and wanting a better life for working people means you automatically should support China. You should support, the Soviet Union. You should support Cuba. Look. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Why did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. become a household name? Why? Why did the Montgomery bus boycott happen? Why? For years, black people had been struggling for their rights, been protesting and demonstrating and, winning very little because the government was so oppressive. What happened? In 1954, Emmett Till was lynched. He was brutally murdered. He was a young black man who allegedly whistled at a white woman, and he was killed. He was murdered for it. And when he was buried at his funeral, they had an open casket, so you could see his mutilated body, see what the racist did to his body at his funeral. And it was photographed. And the Soviet Union took the picture of Emmett Till's mutilated body and sent it all over the world. And they said, this is what America is like. They say they believe in democracy. Look what they do to black people. And they showed that picture. And that humiliated the United States around the world. And all over the African world, communist parties were growing in big numbers. And the USA and the CIA were saying, how do we stop black people in Africa from joining communist parties? And the Soviet Union, was showing this picture. Oh, you think the USA is a good ally? Take a look at this picture. And Kwame Nkrumah was getting stronger, and African communist parties were getting stronger. And then in South Africa, you had armed uprisings led by communists against apartheid. And so all over the world, people looked at that picture of Emmett Till that the Soviet Union sent all over the world, and the United States was panicking. And it was in that context of the Soviet Union exposing the United States as a racist country, rallying the people of Africa against imperialism, sending weapons to the people of South Africa to fight apartheid, sending weapons to the people of Zimbabwe, which was then Rhodesia, to fight apartheid. It was in that context that suddenly the Democratic Party, the Kennedy family, and a lot of liberals said, okay, we are going to support protests against Jim Crow segregation. And they went to Montgomery, Alabama, and they found a very young man, who was young enough that he wasn't a communist, right? He was a civil rights activist, but he was young enough, and he hadn't been around in the 30s, he hadn't been around before World War II, so he had no ties to the Communist Party, and Dr. Martin Luther King emerged. If it wasn't for the Soviet Union, there wouldn't have been a civil rights movement in this country. There wouldn't have been. Another example, right? In Monroe, North Carolina, 1962, right? A group of black people wanted the right to go swimming. They wanted the right to go swimming in a swimming pool. and they wouldn't allow it. So they protested against, Monroe, North Carolina. They protested outside the swimming pool for the right of black people to go swimming in the swimming pool. And the Ku Klux Klan came and shot at them. So they formed their own chapter of the National Rifle Association, the NRA. They formed the NRA, the black NRA, and they shot back at the Klan with their guns. And of course, they were immediately charged with a crime. And the leader of them, Robert F. Williams, he was charged with the crime of shooting at the Ku Klux Klan. So where did he go? China. He went to China, and he met with Mao in China. And Mao personally met with Robert F. Williams. And then the Cuban government gave Robert F. Williams a radio station. And so from Cuba, Robert F. Williams, the leader of the NAACP of Monroe, North Carolina, started broadcasting communist revolutionary messages all throughout the U.S. South. And it was and anyone in the South could turn on their radio and hear a civil rights leader calling for communist revolution from Cuba. The messages were broadcast. And so the U.S. government was so afraid of the fact that black people were being encouraged to rise up, that Cuba was broadcasting black revolutionary messages into the United States, that Mao was supporting Robert F. Williams, that suddenly, Lyndon Johnson was forced to sign the Civil Rights Act. He said, okay, we better give people some rights so they don't listen to Robert F. Williams and Radio Free Dixie and rise up. We would not have gotten the Civil Rights Act if it wasn't for Cuba broadcasting communist black revolutionary messages into this country over the radio, and Mao embracing Robert F. Williams. There would not have been a civil rights movement supported by the Democratic Party and the Kennedy family and the liberals if it hadn't been for the communists taking the photo of Emmett Till and spreading it all over the world. There's many examples, right? Women got the right to vote in the Soviet Union immediately. As soon as the Bolsheviks took power, women were allowed to vote. Women in the United States couldn't vote, right? And the USA had a little bit of a hard time telling the whole country that the Soviet Union's a brutal dictatorship, but the United States is a free country, when in the United States, women weren't allowed to vote, but in the Soviet Union, they could. And it was in the context of the Soviet Union giving women the right to vote, and Soviet communists leading the suffragist movement, and that's true. You can look that up. Susan B. Anthony, the leader of the suffragists, was a good friend of Eugene Debs. The National Women's Party that was jailed, their members went to prison and were force-fed for protesting for the right to vote. Their members largely were communists, and they were protesting during World War I and for women's rights to vote. Women got the right to vote here in the United States because of the Soviet Union. So if these people are liberals and they say, well, they're too afraid of being canceled, we can't support China, we can't support, Cuba, we can't, almost every progressive reform that has been won in the United States for black people, for women, for labor unions, has been won because of communist countries around the world. If the Soviet Union had never existed, you wouldn't have labor unions, you women wouldn't be voting, you wouldn't have had a civil rights movement. If China and Mao didn't exist, if Fidel Castro didn't exist, we would never have had a Civil Rights Act. Look, it's because of the communist and socialist revolutions around the world that all the things that liberals say they believe in happened. We would never have gotten the welfare state. We would never have gotten Social Security. Women would have never gotten the right to vote. There never would have been a civil rights movement if it wasn't for communist countries around the world. And you better believe it. And nobody knows that more than the American government does. Read CIA documents. Read, the Supreme Court and what was said by members of the U.S. Supreme Court. This is a fact, right? That the reforms that were won in this country for the labor movement, for women, for black people, were largely won because of the threat of communist revolution and because of what happened in the Soviet Union and in China and in Cuba and in other socialist countries. So any liberal who thinks that they can say, well, I'm against those socialist countries, I'm going to hurt them, and I'm going to be for progressive good things in this country is delusional, because there's only one world. It's one world, folks. We all live in the same planet. It's all connected. And when the people in the developing world and people in other countries are under attack, we are under attack in this country. The fall of the Soviet Union hurt the labor movement in the United States. Ever since the fall of the Soviet Union in the United States, wages have decreased, right? Unions have gotten weaker. Austerity and neoliberalism has marched forward. The fall of the Soviet Union was the beginning of neoliberalism in the Democratic Party, right? It was the beginning of the new labor reforms in Britain, right? The fall of the Soviet Union hurt American workers significantly. Our unions got weaker. Our wages went down. Our living conditions have gotten worse. You better believe it. You better believe it. You better believe it. Alrighty. What do I think of how Ortega has implemented socialism in Nicaragua? What do I think of it? Well, I think he's done a heck of a job. You know, I mean, look, low rates of poverty, health care for the population, a micro-entrepreneur program to help Nicaraguans start their own businesses. I mean, they've done a lot of good stuff. I mean, obviously there's plenty of room for criticism on a number of issues, but I think they've done some pretty good work in Nicaragua. Eliminating poverty, building things, access to health care, access to education, wiping out illiteracy, building roads, best roads in Latin America, says California Rules. I think they've done a pretty good job compared to most of the region. I think they've done a decent job. All right. To Kill a Nation, great book by Michael Parenti, and it's so true that, lies were used to justify the bombing of Yugoslavia. It's an anniversary, I believe. And yeah, I mean, the humanitarian interventionism, right? Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Alrighty, Operation Paperclip. That was after World War II. The CIA recruited a number of Nazi intelligence officers. There was the Galen organization, which was a group of Nazis. It was Nazi spies. To fight the Soviets, basically, the U.S. government recruited the Galen organization, which were Hitler's spy network, basically. And Operation Paperclip was flying them to the United States, helping them escape to Argentina, recruiting them to the CIA. A lot of Nazi intelligence officers were recruited to the American CIA. That's Operation Paperclip. All right. Chinese and North Korean human rights violations. Well, look, I've said this before. These countries are under attack. They are trying to raise themselves up from poverty. They're fighting for their lives. I don't agree with everything that's ever been done in those countries. I'm sure there are big mistakes that have been made, but overwhelmingly, the way to advance human rights, the way to advance human rights in China or North Korea is to get U.S. imperialism off their back and to get the U.S. imperialists to leave them alone and to help them develop economically and raise people out of poverty. Sanctions are not going to spread human rights to North Korea or China. Economic warfare is not going to, threats of militarism and attack. If you care about the human rights of the people in China, if you care about the people of human rights in North Korea, then you should be the biggest anti-war activist and the biggest anti-imperialist ever, because the more that countries are attacked, the more they have to tighten up and become authoritarian. So just remember that. All right. If we have human rights problems in this country. A lot of what we were told about these countries is a lie, but not everything. Sometimes there are situations that are true, but the way to help human rights in those countries is to want the USA to leave them alone and let them build a prosperous socialist society. All right, best books on socialism with Chinese characteristics. The China Wave, Rise of a Civilization State, a very, very good book. There's another book called When China Rules the World that's written by Martin Jakes of the Morning Star, very, very good book. There's actually a very good documentary called The Coming War on China, made by John Pilger. You can watch that, a very good documentary. I also would recommend some of the books they've published. Read President Xi Jinping's writings on the governance of China. Good stuff. Yeah, there's a lot out there that you can read. All righty. Best Marxist groups to join in the United States for tankies. Look, none. Okay? And, people that are watching that are in one group or another, that's no disrespect to you. I spent 8 years in one group. Before that, I was around another group for about a year. It's complicated. And look, none of the groups in the United States are up to the task. right? There's no group in the United States that really is a party to speak of, right? A communist party represents the most advanced elements. It's a broad grouping of a lot of different advanced elements. What you have in the United States, there's a lot of little cults, a lot of little sects, a lot of little tiny little groups that are the ego trip of one or two people, basically. I'm building the Center for Political Innovation, CPI, which is not a party. It's a think tank to promote socialist education. And that's the idea. That's what we need. We need to get to the masses. We need to get out of the movement and get to the masses. And that these communist parties are very small. They're very irrelevant. You know, some are worse than others and some are better than others. But at the end of the day, none of them really have a mass following. None of them have more than a few thousand people. None of them really have more than a few hundred people, honestly. You know, and at the end of the day, we need to get to the masses. We need to get to the masses. We need to get to average Americans. I'm tired of trying to be king of the protest cage, trying to fight with this group or that group to be king of the anti-war liberal protest or whatever. We need to get to the masses. Average Americans need to understand that capitalism is the problem, socialism is the answer, imperialism hurts them. We need to get to the masses. That's why I'm building the CPI as an educational think tank. If you'd like to join the CPI, you can send me an email, calebmaupin@gmail.com. I can connect you. We have Zoom calls every Saturday. We have web conferences every month, and we're going to start having in real life events as soon as restrictions are lifted. We're going to start having events around the country, and we're going to open the membership. We're building the new website right now. Very exciting. Send me an email. All righty. Is Trotskyism and the synthetic left the same thing? Not exactly. Okay. Trotskyism is... All right, I'm a little tired, folks, but that's okay. I love talking to you. I love my community, and I'm going to answer your questions. All right. So, within the communist movement, within socialist movements, there have always been two types of people. There have been the revolutionary intelligentsia, right? And that's the people that they're usually from the middle class. They're usually young students. Some people never grow out of it, but a lot of times it's young people. They're angry at injustice. They don't fit in with society. They want a revolution. That's called the revolutionary intelligentsia. It always exists. No matter where you go in the world, you'll find it. Young people, intellectuals, middle-class people that want a revolution. Never more than 1 to 10% of the population. It's a small group of people, but they always exist. But they don't make revolutions. Revolutions are made by the broad masses of people, right? And the broad masses of people have very different desires than the revolutionary intelligentsia. The broad masses of people only turn to communism when there's a crisis, when their life is unlivable. They turn to communism as a way to get stability in their life. They want jobs, they want health care, they want to end the wars. They become communists because they believe the communists can give it to them. Meanwhile, the revolutionary intelligentsia, they want chaos and destruction, and they want to tear the old society down, right? So the broad masses want stability. And the revolutionary intelligentsia, they want chaos, right? So Lenin comes along in Russia, and he's organizing the revolutionary intelligentsia, and he organizes them in a way that they can mobilize the broad masses of people for peace, land, and bread, right? So the revolutionary intelligentsia, organized by Lenin, goodness gracious, all right, economy grew larger, China larger economy, and Gramsci. All right. Okay. All right. So Lenin organizes the revolutionary intelligentsia to go mobilize the broad masses of people to overthrow capitalism, create the Soviet Union. That's big, right? He takes the revolutionary intelligentsia and he gets them to mobilize the broad masses of people. But there's a bit of a contradiction. Some people in the Bolshevik Party are from the broad masses of people. Some people in the Bolshevik Party are from the revolutionary intelligentsia, right? Lenin dies. You have two leaders of the Bolshevik Party, Stalin and Lenin, right? Or, I'm sorry, you have two leaders of the Bolshevik Party after Lenin dies, Stalin and Trotsky. Trotsky is from the revolutionary intelligentsia. He's a middle-class guy. He spent most of his life living in New York City and Vienna and Berlin and London. He's a middle-class guy who's a very good writer and speaker, but he's not from the working class, and he's not even lived in Russia most of his life. He's lived in exile, and he hates peasants, and he he has this whole theory of permanent revolution that rejects the importance of the peasantry, and he thinks the Russian peasantry are a bunch of ignorant rabble and whatever. That's Trotsky. Stalin, on the other hand, Stalin is not even Russian. He's a national minority. He's from Georgia. He's from a very poor family. He was learning to be a priest before he became a communist. And Stalin is a mass organizer, and he organizes labor unions, and he knows how to talk to people and all of that. Well, Stalin has the program of socialism in one country. Like, he realizes there's not going to be a revolution in Germany or in the rest of the world, so he's going to build the Soviet Union into a strong socialist country. Trotsky, on the other hand, says, oh no, Soviet Union doesn't matter, it's too poor. We need to just have the Soviet Union be a base area for a permanent revolution to spread communism all over the world. Well, they don't agree, right? Trotsky was the revolutionary intelligentsia. Stalin was the broad masses of people. Stalin was more conservative than Trotsky, right? The broad masses of people in Russia were pretty socially conservative. So Stalin brought back the traditional family. They had the Soviet family. Stalin outlawed abortion, and he outlawed homosexuality. Stalin eventually brought back the Russian Orthodox Church. Stalin was pretty conservative because he was from the broad masses of people. Trotsky, on the other hand, is for permanent revolution, and he recruits a lot of intellectuals and college professor kind of people and academics to quit the communist parties and start a fourth international and be Trotskyists, right? And the Trotskyists are basically professional anti-communists. They go around Europe and the United States trying to undermine and work against the communist parties that are aligned with the Soviet Union, and go around and say, oh, the Soviet Union's not really communist or whatever. Trotsky is the real revolutionary. That's Trotskyism, right? And the Trotsky, he maintained that he had the pure communism of Lenin, even though Lenin hated him, which is a whole other story. He was a pure, true revolutionary, and that Stalin was just this, conservative guy who just wants to build a more prosperous Soviet Union, not spread a global communist civil war all over the world. So it's these two souls within socialism, right? Stalin represents the broad masses of people who turn to socialism because they want stability. It's almost conservative, right? Trotsky represents the middle-class revolutionary intelligentsia. The synthetic left is, after World War II, the CIA starts pouring money into the revolutionary intelligentsia and trying to manipulate the revolutionary intelligentsia and use them against the Soviet Union. So the synthetic left is like stage 2. Trotskyism is just the revolutionary intelligentsia breaking with the socialist countries. That's what that is. The synthetic left is an intentional manipulation of the CIA of the revolutionary intelligentsia. That's the difference. Trotskyism and the revolutionary and the synthetic left kind of flow from each other, but they're part of the same process, but they're not the same thing. Okay. Ba'athist Iraq was socialistic, but Saddam was state capitalism, more like Saudi. Agree? No, I would say that it had a socialistic economy. I wouldn't say it was like Saudi Arabia. I mean, it was, you had a Ba'ath movement, you had labor unions and stuff. I wouldn't equate, Saddam's Iraq with Saudi Arabia. I don't think that's correct. I would say Ba'athist Iraq, as bad as Saddam Hussein was, I would say it was a socialist society, just like Syria, just like Libya. I don't agree with that, unfortunately. I don't endorse Saddam Hussein. I think he did really awful things, but I think he did create a socialist society. You can have bad socialist leaders, All right, next question. Does any socialist country have free press? Yes, Venezuela. I've been there, and I've seen the free press in Venezuela. Not only do they have anti-government media everywhere, they have community media in Venezuela. In the working class neighborhoods, one of the things the Bolivarian government has done is built all kinds of community access radio shows and all kinds of community radio and TV networks to broadcast messages. The colectivos have their own TV networks that are not in line with the government. And in Venezuela, one of the main things the socialist government has done is expand average people's access to the media, use the government to fund community-controlled media. Yeah, in Venezuela, there is a free press, absolutely. And the opposition, they have their media, and they're on TV all the time. And on top of that, within the Bolivarian movement, there's all kinds of different press that is putting out their views. So there you go. Yeah, Venezuela has a free press. It's far more free than our press. Average people have far more access to media in Venezuela than they do here in the USA in terms of putting out their message. Look, I've just got a YouTube channel. If I was in Venezuela, I'd probably be on TV right now, even if I didn't, so there you go. All right. All right. Communism in small groups. Well, the Soviet Union wasn't a small country. I mean, it's a huge country. And they industrialized, they raised millions out of poverty. They electrified the whole country with socialism. They invented space travel. So, yeah, it doesn't apply there. China has the biggest population of any country in the world. It was socialism. They've become the largest economy in the world. They've built the world's largest power plants. They have the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world, Huawei Technologies. If socialism only works in small groups, why did Russia and China both become superpowers with socialism? If anything, small groups, communism, the goal of communism is creating a society with vast abundance. A small group of people isn't going to be able to create vast abundance. So, I think utopian communities, when people talk about small groups, they're talking about utopian communities. Utopian communities and communism are not the same thing. All right. Someone's suggesting I go read the new Council on Foreign Relations document. I will. I'll check that out. All right. Antonio Gramsci. What do I think of Gramsci? Gramsci was an important leader of the Italian Communist Party. He was in prison, and from prison he wrote a number of important documents he wrote his prison notebooks, which were kind of written in code, and they were a lot about the cultural struggle, and they're widely quoted in academia, and they're Marxist analysis, but they focus on cultural hegemony and cultural issues, and they are not written in Marxist language. He doesn't talk about class struggle. Instead of saying Marxism, he says the theory of praxis, and because it's written kind of in code, because of that, academics, it's safe for academia. Because it doesn't sound like communist propaganda. Academics love Gramsci. In fact, a lot of people don't even know Gramsci was a communist. Look, when I was in college, they quoted Gramsci all the time in sociology, anthropology, political science, and they have no idea he's a communist, right? They just think he's just some smart guy. And they quote him to just talk about cultural hegemony and how, the influence of culture on society. The Frankfurt School promoted Gramsci. And actually, it's interesting, Pete Buttigieg, his father, Pete Buttigieg's father was the president of the International Gramsci Society for many years. So Pete Buttigieg's, father was very key in promoting Gramsci around the world, and was probably working with the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom to try and use that to roll back actual Marxism. I can't read there was a super chat that came through, and I wrote it down too quickly and I couldn't read what I'm writing, so I'm rolling back to say, will China's economy grow larger than the United States? According to some reports, it already has. According to some reports, some reports say that China has already outstripped the United States. Some reports still say China has the second largest economy in the world, but many reports say that China has already outstripped the United States because of the pandemic. China is having more growth and such. So it depends by what measurement. Some measurements say China has already outstripped the United States. Some say it's still second, but it's coming up along. So there you go. All right, folks. I'm just about hoarse. So I'm gonna cut it off here, but it's always fun to engage with you. I think we had a lot of fun tonight. I got fired up in my opening once again, which is great. I've got some energy. You all asked some good questions. That's what makes the program. Look, your super chat questions make the show. They really do. We had great super chat questions, so we had a great show tonight. That was a lot of fun. I had a great time. Always a pleasure to engage with all of you. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Did I miss a super chat? Really? I thought I answered the super chat. I missed Kinky. Did I miss your super chat? What was your? I answered the one about communism in small groups. Was there another one, Kinky? Was there another one? Another super chat I missed? Give it to me, Kinky, before I go. I'm going to answer your super chat, Kinky. Thank you, Charles, for the super chat. What did I miss? What was your super chat, Kinky? I don't want to miss your super chat. I did the closing, but you're disappointed again, but good night. What? Kinky, come on, give me your super chat. I'll answer your super chat. Which super chat did I miss? Which one was it? Which one was it? All right, I'm not going. If you give me your super chat, Kinky, I'll give you an answer. Come on, come on. All right, what is this? Yes, sorry, maybe I missed it. Oh, okay, yeah, because I answered your thing about communism and small groups, and I thought that was your super chat, but there you go. Okay, good. I just want to make sure everyone gets an answer, right? I want to give people answers to their super chats, right? Your super chats make this show happen, so all right, just making sure you got your answer there. Caleb, you are good, says T. All right, I'm glad. See, I care about you all. You're my community. If I give you a super chat, you deserve an answer. So, all right, just wanted to make sure. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.